Spinning. Okay, we're live. This is part two. I don't know how many parts I'm going to do of this sort of segment over the next few weeks with a few different people. Today I have BJ with me, and he's looking cool with all of his books there. What's behind you, by the way? I haven't seen you in this room before.
So behind me is a china hutch full of some of my favorite books. I'm actually
Okay.
building a library in this space. Um,
Wow.
I can spin it around really quick. So I've got some shelving over there that needs to be organized. Some shelving over there,
Wow.
shelving over there. So I'm turning this whole space into sort of like a library. And up
Oh,
behind
I
me
like it.
is some of the best, most favorite books ever. That's the great books of the Western world that I always talk about in the middle.
All right.
And
Yeah.
then on the bottom left is some of the supplementary books that go with the great books to help
Mm-hmm.
you kind of figure it out, like you have a professor in your house telling you what to read and what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Over in this corner is my occult section of books.
Ooh.
So, like all of my secret teachings of all ages, my occult sciences from Papus, my Museum of Lost Wonder, some Kabbalistic and Freemasonic books,
Uh-huh.
uh, all that cool stuff. Then I've got way up there is some more occult books,
Uh-huh.
Freemasonic texts, and then very very top is all Ken Wilber's books. Up there, his
Wow.
entire list of works he's ever written. So I've got a couple glass
Couple
casings,
books. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
and some of the glass ones just hold all the important books. So
Okay. Good. Okay. That's funny. So in our segment I did earlier, uh, we talked a little for a few minutes about how like new literacy is to humanity, and to a large degree how new language is. And there, I mean, there's still even roughly 10 to 15% of the population that's illiterate, and it changes how that we work. The more we can read, and the more that we do read, whether that's a bunch of books like that, whether it's
yeah. So
digital
like
or audio. Go ahead.
language for me is really kind of a crazy thing. There's actually a book sitting around. Like I literally anything that we ever talk about, man, I will have a book
Mm.
to reference. I'll like flip a book out right here. The Language Instinct by Steven Pinker.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
This one. It's a really good book on the origin of language and how it operates in our brains and stuff. Language. One of the people that I really love listening to is Terence McKenna. Do you ever listen to
Hmm.
Terence McKenna? Like a lot of
Just
people do. If
just a little, but I haven't really gotten into him.
So I've listened to hours and hours and hours and hours of McKenna lectures, and he talked about language being like a fundamental aspect of reality, like literally, not in this sort of metaphysical sense, but that language actually is at the foundation of the entire construct of reality, and he breaks that
Right.
down in multiple layers. And even in sort of like modern quantum theories and stuff, the idea of this like language being at the foundation is very kabbalistic. It's super like in Sanskrit from the Hindus. It's very kabbalistic from the Jews. It's very like holographic. This idea of like
Right. Right.
language. And, McKenna would eat mushrooms and have
Yeah.
crazy experiences with DMT and have crazy experiences, and I've experienced some things like that in my own world. So this idea of language and the way that we think about the world, it's phenomenal. It's a blessing and a curse though,
Hmm.
because language is how we take this giant abstraction of
Hmm.
experience of
Right. Right.
purity, and then we
Right. Right.
sort of like bring it down. We like lasso the moon and pull it
Right. Right.
towards us, and they flatten it out in this nice, neat sort of box that we can say this is
Yeah.
that and this is not that, and then our conscious awareness sort of like chugs along, and we formulate opinions and ideas about the world, and the language that we
Right.
use is a tool by
Mm.
which we get things done, but it also hardcore limits us. So I don't know, language,
Right.
I want to talk about language like all day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Well,
could.
we when we were on that subject for a minute, in part one of this, um, we were talking about how on the chemical level, like I've watched just some more of the brain chemistry lectures by Robert Sapolsky, and he talks about how, and he's more of probably a scientific materialist, but he talks about how that, normally what's going on in our brains is we've got these neurons that are firing with the neurochemistry between them, and the chemistry between what happens normally compared to the chemistry that happens when we have psychedelics, it's very similar, but also very different. And that's why that, because basically the psychedelics replace that neurochemistry. And then
Yeah.
that's why we'll see and hear voices as it will appear. I don't really have psychedelic experience so much,
Well,
but it'll
like under
seem
your
like
belt.
a real thing. Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to get to hear from you and Connor today, is because we're talking about religious experiences as it relates to, we normally think of those in prayer, meditation, or
Sure.
things like that, but then also
Near-death experiences.
yeah, and also how it would relate
dogma.
to drug experiences, because
Sure.
I know you guys talk a lot about those, and not a lot of people in our circle have those experiences to compare. So I got a little bit from Connor, but I'd like to get more from you on that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Psychedelics have been around for a long time in human history, since the dawn of humanity, as far as we can tell. The classical psychedelics, right? The classic psychedelics, people think like mescaline, DMT,
Right.
LSD, mushrooms, which is psilocybin. These are all serotonergic drugs. They all operate on 5-HT receptors, which are these receptors in your brain that fire and connect with serotonin. So serotonin in our bodies is it serves almost all the functions that keep us alive. Serotonin is what we use to like survive. It's what we use to like look at the world and understand it, use our eyesight and our touch. Serotonin's also sort of like the happy drug that is long-term goal oriented. When people, masturbate really quick, or they eat food that they like, or they watch a movie that makes them feel good, or they play video games, they get a dopamine hit, right? This surge of dopamine, this dopaminergic reaction, which like methamphetamines will release. But something like serotonin is like when you study for a test forever and then you pass the test and you feel good. That's like a serotonin hit, right? And serotonin is sort of that process of our brains. And these drugs like DMT and LSD and stuff, like what they do to those neurotransmitters is it just reroutes the pathways a little bit. But what's really, really, really peculiar about these drugs is that they mimic serotonin. They're so similar to the structure of serotonin that they're almost like it's actually crazy. And so when people have these experiences,
another book,
some of these more materialist thinkers will always make the argument that, oh, whatever's happening is just happening in your brain. It's not actually real. This religious experience that you're intuiting is really just your brain misfiring. And they kind of reduce the world down in this weird way.
The Newtonian atomistic kind of perspective.
Yeah, like a materialist perspective. When really the question that I have is, what is reality then, if not, just a cacophony of neurological pulses firing and electrical pulses firing. There's a book, the Holographic Universe book. This book. Right. Dang, man, this is perfect. Holographic Universe. Have you ever read this or heard of it?
I've heard of it. I haven't read that one particularly. I've what do you call it? I've read some chapters. Well, I've read some chapters. Let me see. There's a book that came out just a couple years ago called the Black Hole War. And that book had a chapter that was basically, I think 2 chapters that were basically a condensed version of that book.
Yeah, basically in the Holographic Universe, the author, Michael Talbot, basically gives in layman's terms Immanuel Kant's philosophy of form. Where Immanuel Kant believes that we can never experience a thing in and of itself. It's like, here I'm holding this book, right? This book has form. I can find its dimension. I can find its roughness and its smoothness. I can smell it. You do all these things to understand this book. But Immanuel Kant argues that we could only understand our perception of this book via our own intakes, right? Our own these sort of apertures Right, the senses. And so
Right.
as we sense this book, we can never actually know what this book is like in its real sense.
Right.
It's
Right.
always our interpretation of it. It's
Right.
never the actual thing. So there's this duality of the universe where we are
Mm.
looking out and understanding and feeling and measuring on one level, but on another level, there's so many aspects of this actual thing that we could never come to know.
Mm.
Um, in a way that there's this dichotomy of like holographic sort ofness, and that's basically what I feel drugs
Mm.
help us understand is
Right.
sort of that aspect of reality to run away from you. You know, it's like the closer you get to the truth, the further away it
Mm.
withdraws.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to show you this really quick. So I
The
don't
other way.
know how to show you this. Can you see? So this
Uh.
is
Yeah.
5 methyl. So that's 5-methyl DMT,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
can kind of see how the structure is. There's a
The
couple of
chemical
nitrous groups
structure. Yeah.
there. Yeah, that's the skeleton structure.
Mm.
Well, that is exactly psilocin,
Right.
which is
Psilocybin.
yeah, psilocybin, which breaks into psilocin in your stomach.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only difference is like a methyl group and a single oxygen, and then
Yeah.
serotonin, which
Yeah.
if I were to show
Sapolsky
you,
was making the same point in his lectures.
yeah. So like, look at DMT really quick, like actual DMT, which is this here. So that's DMT,
Mm.
and that is serotonin.
Yeah.
Wait, there. It's
So we're
exactly the same except
yeah.
for one oxygen and one methyl group.
Right.
So
Is
there are
that
some
is
people who
that
actually.
in the holographic
Oh
universe
no,
or you switched books?
that's
Okay.
DMT, the spirit molecule.
Okay. Okay.
This is Dr. Rick Strassman. So this
Okay. Yeah.
man did human research studies in 1990 to like 95 with like a group of 100 people in the University of New Mexico, where
Right.
he studied and actually sort of like in a scientific way took
Mm.
down their experiences. If anybody wants to have real scientific studies dealing with psychedelic drugs, read that book. But the reason why I bring all this up, language, holographic universe,
Mm.
serotonin being highly similar to DMT,
Right. Right.
is of all of these classic psychedelic drugs, because there's a ton of psychedelics that operate on different aspects of the brain than
Mm.
serotonin. DMT is said to be the spirit molecule. It's very popularized
Mm.
by Joe Rogan and Terence McKenna and other people. But
Yeah.
apparently, when you die, 49 days after you die, the Buddhists, the Tibetans, have this belief that your soul reincarnates.
Mm.
And actual biology has shown that about 49 days after conception, when a sperm meets an egg, this DMT stuff, the pineal gland starts to form where
Mm.
your throat is as an embryo. Before your brain even starts to form, the pineal gland starts to form. And then 49 days, so there's this weird synchronicity. And as you grow into a little baby, the pineal gland gets lodged further and further back up into your brain until it reaches the very dead center of
Wow.
your noggin.
Mm.
And there have been no actual live human studies of the pineal gland that we know of.
Mm.
Because it's so deeply rooted in your brain, we can never actually get to it. We can never penetrate it enough to understand it while a person's alive. We can never dissect it. We can never really understand what's going on there, besides like MRI imaging or something. And
Mm.
DMT, the reason why I bring all this up is a majority of people who experience it, if you read these books and read people's accounts and have your own experience, you will have this sort of coming to be with these entities, with these like actually living, feeling, thinking, cognitive entities that are made of this hyperdimensional color, energy, and language. It's like a literal breathing alien language that's
Mm.
moving all about, and it's like Jenga blocks that are like ripping apart and coming back together and ripping apart and coming back together. And these letters that you could never draw, you can never really explain them, because when you have this experience, this DMT flash, it's so beyond what you've ever conceived. But you're literally watching this happen. These living letters that form people and buildings and vehicles and all of these things have literal like telepathic communications with you.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And DMT has been used to reach the spirit realm. There's a lot of these sort of synchronicities and stuff. So
What
I want to bring all those things up and go ahead.
what one question, I'm trying to figure out how to actually put this question, that I sort of sometimes get at, and with these experiences that I have none exactly myself, is, I've listened to a little bit of Terence McKenna and some people that have had these experiences, but and they describe it pretty much the same way that you just did. And it sounds a lot like a religious phenomena, and it's similar to other religious phenomena or spiritual phenomena, as far as an experience that can be, you might describe as with the divine. Now, perhaps the strength of religion in the past, or at certain times in history, or the goal of religion when it was working properly, or when it works properly as an institution, is to take religious experiences, however that they come about, and help people sort of like what we were trying to get at in our last sort of segment, but help people translate all that into something that they can implement
into their lives.
Yeah,
something tangible.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so basically, like, if you tell me you or Connor or Terence McKenna and anybody else who's like, yeah, I had all these experiences, it was great, and like it felt like love and all these things.
Sure.
Great, but I guess that's what I'm still like.
So there's this limitation of language.
How to take that and move it into the reality that
true
we
gnosis
live in. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the problem that I see in the world, where real, true religious experience becomes ingrained in a physical dogma and then becomes perverted over time and then becomes misunderstood, is just the process of human language being limited and our understanding of things being limited. And so when someone has this insane experience, and it's more real than anything they've ever experienced before, and they try to explain it to someone, it's like trying to tell someone about a color that you have never seen before and that they've never seen before, and then you finally see it. How do you explain a color that no one has seen? It's that sort of idea, right? So there's an occult and esoteric law, I guess, or tenet, in which, in order to explain something or really know it, of the metaphysical origin of something that's not right in front of our faces, we must come to know these things by metaphor and analogy. Because the world is so complex, you could almost imagine it like, I always give the analogy of the reality that we live in is like a hall of mirrors. And there's it's like mirror after mirror after mirror reflecting an image. And some of the images are closer to the origin, the actual real image, than the rest. And every phenomena that we can ever think of or actually intuit or perceive are just reflections of this sort of singular process, or the singular, unified monotheistic entity, right? And the idea of coming to grips with this sort of metaphysical reality in a way that we actually perceive it is called gnosis. Knowledge from your actual perception is an ancient alchemical hermetic word called gnosis. Gnosis. And it means to come to know from experience. And so the Buddha, the Gautama Siddhartha Buddha said, wisdom cannot be spoken. You cannot speak wisdom to someone. You have to come to it yourself. But the only way that I can share this... go ahead.
If you... The Tao... The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao.
Is not the real Tao. Right. Exactly that. Because these words that we have, these thought forms that we then sort of churn and then spit out vibration into your ear from my vocal box are representations.
It's symbols. Yeah.
They're symbols.
Symbolic,
it's a representation, right? So we look at the world, we ingrain the image
Mm.
We give it a meaning in a symbol, and then we spit it out, and then we
Right.
agree on the meaning of the symbols.
By
And
the way,
that's
have you read The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist?
I have not. I've heard of
Okay.
it though.
Yeah, yeah. One of my favorite books, and sometimes I forget about it, but definitely, you definitely want to read it for sure. You would love it. But
Is it fiction?
no, no, no. It's boy, it's definitely a must read. But basically, the great thing that he does, so it has two parts within the book. One part, like half the book, is just talking about how the brain is formed into its, mainly the fact of how it's formed into its two halves and the science of that.
Is it
And
like the
then,
bicameral mind that it talks about?
well,
Does it use that terminology?
well, he's mainly just talking about the right hemisphere and left hemisphere,
Okay,
and why there's that dichotomy,
sure.
and all of that. And then the second half of the book is making the point of how, from his look at history, which is the other reason I think you'd really appreciate it, is it's like if you look at early history, and he kind of starts in the pre-Socratic.
Awesome.
Well,
That's
he
like the
starts,
great books here.
yeah. What's Heraclitus? Heraclitus is like one of the
Okay.
main guys that he draws from, because he kind of looks at Heraclitus and those pre-Socratic philosophers as almost like the unpolluted, that were more of the right hemisphere. And then
Yeah.
over time, between Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and so
And
on
the
and so on,
rest. Yeah.
yeah, and we kind of got in this trap of, it's called the Master's Emissary, and which I believe is a sort of a little story from one of Nietzsche's books, I think from Zarathustra. But
Zarathustra. Yeah.
yeah, but the reason it's Master's Emissary is because it's the idea is that the unconscious mind, which is our right hemisphere, is really the master, but our conscious
Hmm.
mind has been sort of put out in the world as
Hmm.
sort of the emissary of the master. But over time, it has tried to say, like, no, I'm the boss
Try to
now.
usurp the master. Yeah, like
Yeah,
Satan.
exactly.
Like
Yeah,
Lucifer, in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah, this ego of like, yeah, I definitely
Right.
vibe. I might read that. I will read that book actually.
Yeah,
I
you
like
definitely
it.
should.
I agree.
It's on Audible. It's on Audible too. But the reason I mention that is because he often, and he has an interesting little interview. I think it's only about an hour that he did with Jordan Peterson, Ian McGilchrist, where, it's funny because he likes to like catch people when they talk about the word presentation or representation, because he'll make those distinctions that he thinks are really important. Um, because when sometimes we call it a presentation, like what we were saying a couple minutes ago, how
Like a persona.
well, like we put out our language
We
of like,
project it. Something
well,
something
yeah,
that's projected.
well, so we, like right now we're saying words. What those are is it's a presentation of what's going on in our mind, right?
Sure.
And the thing is that is what we're doing
Even
is
that
we're
is a representation. Yeah.
right, but it's presenting what we believe to be inside of our minds, or whatever. So sometimes he makes the distinction of there's a presentation, representation,
Presentation. Yeah.
and then and those are all symbolic. But the reason that's important is because that's all they can be, and almost just like
Yeah.
if you like
Nothing can. Nothing is what it really is. It's this
right,
sort of like hall of mirrors. It's just
right, they're
everything is a
presentation,
reflection,
right. So they're
or a
presentation.
shadow.
And so ultimately, this is why experience is the key. The gnosis, like you talk about, is because I can tell you all about a book or a bottle or whatever that it is, symbolically or language wise and everything else. But that doesn't really mean anything to you per se until you have your own experience with it.
Unless you've had a semblance of an experience
Right.
that you can then use your representation You
Right.
can use your representative mind to then make the connection symbolically,
Right.
even though you've never experienced something. So
Right.
that's why, like, the formative mind when you're a little kid and you're coming up. Ken Wilber focuses a lot on developmental psychology. He evokes Jean Piaget a lot
Right.
when he talks about these things, and some other people like Jean Gebser, um, with the mental maps of like how your
Right.
cognitive function sort of like grows, and it's this sort of reflections of reflections. And so I have some podcast episodes that I'll drop in the comment section or whatever of this video later for people to go check out, where I can, I go into much more detail about this concept of the infinite unity that breaks itself down into duality and then
Mm.
multiplicity. And there's a sort of like fractal patterning that's happening at every level and every dimension of reality, of this reflective process of a unity becoming dualistic, and then of the dualism finding itself in a multiplicity in order to perpetuate its own existence,
Right.
and that permeates every facet, every level of reality in this room of mirrors. But to go back to language really fast, I wanted
Mhm.
to say that with things like DMT or psychedelics or the religious experience, trying to explain that to someone with these words, if they haven't come to the gnosis of what
Right.
these words are
Experience.
representing, yeah, it's almost like impossible. So we go really far down the line of a metaphor that becomes a metaphor that becomes a metaphor in
Right.
order to neatly wrap up these metaphysical ideas in a way that you can come to know each metaphysical idea a little bit closer at each step of the way,
Mhm.
through this process, which is why in the Old Testament Bible, the
Mhm.
Kabbalists have encoded layers upon layers of meaning. There's actually 4 layers of meaning in the Old Testament Bible, and it's
Mhm.
wrapped up in the acronym PRDS, Pardes. And the word Pardes in Hebrew actually means garden. And so
Right.
in the Garden of Eden, in the Pardes, which is English representative of, further down the line, paradise of
Right.
Pardes, it's basically a way of understanding 4 levels of one line of text. And it's just another symbolic representation of the multifaceted aspect of the universe, which I also, that's
Mhm.
part of the reason why I highly criticize the atomistic,
Yeah.
empirical, very positivist, materialist thinkers,
Right.
because they try and bring down this incredibly complicated universe and trying to understand it in a very one-dimensional sort of
Right.
framework of positivism, of like, can I measure this thing, and can I measure it within this framework? And
Right.
and it's very asinine in my opinion.
And
And the last,
there's so little we can do with that. It's and even that which we can, like when you get down to the atomic level, there's a lot more going on the subatomic level that we don't know about. There's a lot more going
sure,
on outside of our perceivable universe that we don't know about.
totally.
So it's really tough when it's like, okay, it's got to
But
be on
but
this measurable
when you say
scale.
that though, when you say that, their rebuttal is eventually we'll be able to measure it. Like if you say it's something we can't perceive, they'll say yet, right? And then they'll evoke
Yeah.
like the scientism. But my analogy that I give is like, okay, you cannot use a butter knife to, I don't know, cut a diamond. You cannot use a Q-tip to make a
Mm,
baby, like of itself, right? There are things that don't mesh. There's certain things of the universe, there's certain actual rules, and they'll
mm,
agree that there are rules and there are laws, right?
right.
Not all things can be met with the of a singular method. Like I
Mm,
have to have a key to open a locked door. I could break it down maybe, but I can't just like touch it and have it open, right? There's rules.
right.
So there's certain aspects of reality that you cannot get close to, you can't articulate with the method of science. That
Right.
you
Right.
just can't. Please
Well,
measure government. Just
right.
measure
Right.
it.
And,
Tell me how big
and
government, like,
that's true. Well, that's a psychological phenomenon, but also there's I don't know if I want to get into the specific. What was the books? But there's a lot of people now who say that now we're getting to more of the atomic understanding of quantum physics.
mhm.
It's basically showing evidence that the energy that's there uh, is basically showing evidence. And I don't know if we can really get into it because it's so
It's
abstract
okay.
and
Try.
theoretical. But it's basically showing it's on that level. It's largely seeing what is very much seems like the way that God is described on that subatomic sort of
Sure, sure.
energy
But even
level.
so, that's still a mechanistic approach to understanding this phenomena that
Right.
is reality.
Although I only mention that because if you're like, oh, we're gonna measure everything and understand it one day, uh, maybe that's true, but maybe what you're gonna find is
The
the
language and
same type,
tools you use to measure this thing is not going to be this sort of scientific mathematical language that you're using right now.
or if you even understand it on whatever level, whether it's new theories, new tools, new instruments, whatever, you you may very well end up discovering God and all these things that they've been denying for centuries or whatever. But
Sure.
just find it in different ways.
Sure. And I think though that this sort of like we don't have the method, we don't have the language, is the limiting factor of why dogma
Mm,
becomes what it is. Because
right, right,
there's two levels, fundamental levels of truth,
right,
from
right.
the occult esoteric perspective. The first is esoteric. That is the metaphysical. That's the beyond the seen, beyond the veil. What can't actually be
Mm,
spoken directly of, you can only experience. And then there's the exoteric, which is the outward form. It's the thing
right,
that I
right.
can write down on paper. It's the metaphor I can give you.
Mhm,
And what I feel like has happened in the past centuries from the dawn of time is our
mhm.
language has constantly been improving. Our language has constantly been becoming more and more precise.
Right, right.
Sometimes languages actually degrade and sometimes they evolve. It's not that it's one for one sort of always increasing ratio, just like evolution and reality, things sort of like break down and die and some
Well,
things
also just
actually get ahead.
our ways and our ability to conceptualize and understand all
Concepts,
the
actual
yeah,
concepts.
and reality in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and that's because our language and our tools are always improving
Right, right.
in the greater grand scheme of things, despite maybe this language dies and that language falls off. But for the majority of things, are with more people and more innovation and more competition, and trade and the mixing of cultures as we globalize and become this sort of homogenous soup of people,
Mhm.
which some people complain about and think globalization is a bad thing, which I do in certain ways. We've also gained understanding that we've never had before. Now we have the internet, we have television, we have vehicles, airplanes, space
Right.
flight, like jet propulsion. We have all these new actual phenomena in our world that allow us to then speak about concepts that reflect those things in the
And
metaphysical.
we barely have to worry. This is something we talked about a little bit in the last segment. Is we barely have to worry about things that used to take all of our thought and energy,
Exactly.
like food. We don't have to have to spend almost 0 calories on food. Like some of it might come from our work, but like we could. I don't get paid for this, but this type of thing that somebody could get paid for on some
Yeah.
level. And then I have money to where I can press a button and Postmates show up with food, expending
Oh
zero
yeah.
other calories. Whereas before,
Capitalism
yeah,
and the sort of like platonic idea of we are all very
I'm still listening.
specialized in our fields, even if even if we're highly specialized in our fields and we spend all of our lives doing these meaningless jobs which are just to punch numbers into a computer system to make sure that this fiat currency that doesn't really exist continues so that way people can all get along and not kill each other and eat food and do whatever we want. We have way more leisure than we ever have had before, and it's just unfortunate that people decide to waste away their lives and their leisure time watching Netflix or just playing video games or like reading a fiction book that doesn't actually increase their understanding of the world. That we're not utilizing this leisure time for the betterment of ourselves and of our brothers and sisters under the sun. And that's why I read so many books, and that's why I'm hoping to share my
Well,
philosophy with the world.
and that's
And
true.
to each their own. Everyone's on
Right,
their own path, right? Like entertain yourself if you want, but we have so much leisure.
well, and I would say on that same note, that's where sometimes people have all this extra time on their hands or energy on their hands, and then that's how they get caught up in all these new, well, not necessarily new, but new forms of tribalism and new
Sure,
BS ways of like fake virtue signaling and building up each other's egos and all this
sure.
stuff that is, well, and just materialistic living, which sometimes we might all have those moments where we're a little bit more materialistic
Sure,
and the
sure.
fact of like,
Well,
hey,
that's the West.
yeah, yeah, or capital,
That's the
the
West.
spirit of capitalism can be that way, and we all can kind of have those moments where we uh, behave that way. And it's just like, oh, money, 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 and do those things with all that and enjoy those pleasures. Um,
Connor jumped in. That's cool.
oh,
Or he's not in, but he commented.
yeah, just text, but we'll see. But so I hope there is a evolution of values, and this is a point I
Well,
want to make.
yeah, I mean,
But
whether or not the whole world gets on the same bandwagon on what we value, I
uh-huh.
feel like what I would rather see promulgate and
Mm.
survive to the future is this the language, the understanding of the world
Yeah,
as is now, the complex sort of precision in our language,
right.
because of although English and a lot of the world's languages have lost this sort of ancient guttural vibrating sound that evokes certain parts of our endocrine system and our certain enzymes in our stomach and certain
Mm-hmm.
chemicals like DMT in our brain, because at some point in reality, at some point in history, there were these languages such as Hebrew and these Assyrian languages and older languages
Mm-hmm.
that that I truly believe actually, as part of the language, vibrated our bodies to certain frequencies to
Mm-hmm.
which meditative acts would actually release certain chemicals endogenously within the body, or if not release chemicals that exist there, but would actually alchemically sort of form and actually conjoin these
Well,
chemicals together.
yeah, but that's just and we talked about that again a little bit in our last segment of how novel experience can unlock DNA potential, or and even change what you are and who you are at
uh,
at the
like
the
epigenetically and genetically. Yeah,
yeah, largely that. Although that's a little bit of a still emerging science, so it's hard to say
sure.
exactly
Very
what that
new.
is and what it's not. But to and we kind of got a little bit of that last time, but to just be very simple to what the concept is, at least that we're getting at, is the fact that and it's and I talked about this a little bit, just that makes a lot more sense as far as evolution compared to random mutation. And it's a point that Wilbur makes, how random mutation doesn't really make sense. But if you put these creatures like us into the environment, and because there's new novel experience that we have to adapt ourselves to, now we don't adapt ourselves like by having more fingers or tails or not or whatever. We adapt ourselves by new mental abilities. And
Innovations. It's a meta evolutionary
it is,
process.
but and it's kind of the debate that's hard to get into the science of, because it's still so emerging. And I mentioned it a little bit in the last segment of how they found Einstein's brain that was stolen, and that it
Yeah,
had
but
like
it was a normal brain.
17% more. Yeah, but see, that's kind of the debate of it, is that it had 17% more neurons, and it had
Really? I heard that it was exactly the same as an average human brain.
no, it had about 17% more neurons, which is pretty substantial, and it had at least a couple additional folds that aren't normal,
Mm,
which seemed to just be like its way of, like your the how many folds you have in your brain,
yeah.
to
Or like
some degree
your
is
intellect, right?
right. And so these additional kind of like folding was it kind of like squishing to be able to fit all inside that skull. And I only say that's important because some of that may have been genetic, but I believe a lot of it was, and how we have people who are more have bigger brains.
Well,
It's because
there's a new age there's a new age, sorry to cut you off. There's a new age
that's
sort of
fine.
like pseudoscientific belief that certain experiences can activate genetics, like can activate aspects of the DNA, whether they're like dormant
Right,
or whether like things actually emerge from our experiences epigenetically.
right,
And whether or
right,
not it's true because it's an emerging science, who knows? But
right,
But I mean, this whole idea of like bigger brains, smaller bodies, we don't have to work
Mm,
as hard for our food. We've created a system around us. We've controlled our environment. We've now,
mm.
like, if we can just control ourselves a little bit better, we'd truly become gods. Like we are gods, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
when's the last time you saw a bear? When's the last time that you got into a fight? When's the last time that you
right.
really had to worry about anything, right? It's like this whole world, this environment that's around us that we've really created. It's like, man, I don't know. All
Yeah,
people know are what they've experienced, though.
right, right.
Unless
I
there's
mean,
some divine.
yeah, if you talk to anybody from pre about 200 or 300 years ago, and you could show them that they could live in this world somehow, it would literally seem like a heaven type of paradise compared
Yeah,
to
yeah, totally.
what they had even just 200 or 300 years ago.
And
And
and it's so funny because we have this limited perspective. There's this
right,
there's this thing that I've been wrestling with for a long time that I just
mhm,
can't wrap my head around of, and no one will ever have the answer for because maybe there is none. Especially if you
okay,
talk to an atheist. An
right,
atheist will tell you there is none. The utility behind being born into the world as a biological entity, okay?
mm,
This idea of reincarnation that everyone, all the Hindus, all talked about, that our dharma, we live as human beings, we reincarnate, we
right,
learn lessons, we go up or down based on our karmic our actions, and then we're reincarnated, and then we get to learn more lessons until we completely eject from the matrix, and we get to go be, one with the universe or one with God or whatever happens depending on your
mm,
school of thought. One thing that I always wrestle with is, if this is a school, why is it that all biological beings that
mm,
we have discovered
mm,
are born needing, literally necessity, needing to experience of their own
mm,
egoic accord the world around them? And why is there no collective recurring, like, perpetual memory bank that we all can tap back into? Some people will claim that that they do exist, like the Akashic record or Plato's theory of forms or whatever. But for the most part, most people are dead and blind to this sort of collective consciousness, and they have to
yeah,
experience life in their own accord. And that makes me feel like it's not a school. And I'm digressing here a little bit, but I
that's fine.
sometimes feel like it's a prison of sorts,
Mm,
or just like a sick as fuck game. Which, if you ever study the Gnostic texts,
mm,
I don't know if you know about the Gnostics or if anybody listening ever has heard about the Gnostics, but they were like a sect of Christians who
mm,
deviated from the faith and were utterly curb stomped into oblivion by
yeah,
the Christian dogmatists, for their theory that the universe was created by a demiurge who's actually evil, and the big G god exists
yeah,
outside of the Earth and the cosmos, and the little G god, who's actually a super evil psychopath, created Earth for his own, like, twisted delusion fun
mm,
house shits. And we are, like, as we are born and we die and we reincarnate into new bodies, they actually,
yeah,
the demiurge siphons our the energy from our, like, reincarnated process, and then forces us to continue to reincarnate in human form,
mm,
as the world, like, is perpetuated, and then uses as batteries, which is sort of where the
mm,
Wachowski sisters got the idea for the Matrix. But
yeah,
um, reeling it back in a little bit really fast, the idea of, like, coming into the world, reincarnating, gaining knowledge, it all doesn't make sense to me, because if I was in a school, I should have
mhm.
some sort of prior knowledge. I should be born not having to burn my own hand on fire to know that it's hot. My son shouldn't have to burn his hand on fire to know that it's hot.
Um,
Yet he does, and I do. And when we talk about evolution and, like, God or whatever this, like, process is of things becoming more and more, advanced, I just feel like it's it doesn't make any damn sense to me why
well,
all
okay,
biological
what?
entities.
Well, let me give you my quick take on that. It's just that one, there's a lot that does come with us, but it's just unconscious, and
Sure.
some of it is like, okay, use the example of figuring out that fire is hot, but well, like one of, and Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, how that anybody who ever sees a snake is automatically going to jump even if they've never seen it before. Like
Sure.
we've got
Yeah,
a
I've heard his
deeply,
lectures.
right, we've got a deeply rooted snake detection.
Genetic memory. It's
Right,
like genetic memory is basically what it is. Some Rupert
right.
Sheldrake level shit, but yeah.
And it's funny because as our
Archetypes and stuff.
Well, yeah, but as we have evolved to better uh, operate in the physical environment and survive, including have better vision, see ripe apples, and run away from potentially deadly snakes. It's the same type of thing happens in our psychological brain. There's always the uh, parallel between, and
Sure.
that's why that there's like uh, like there's like a this sort it's sort of a newer philosophy or idea of what do you call it, the behavioral epidemiology. And the thing that that's all about is that over time, when we figured out that there, before we really figured out what was going on the biological level, as far as epidemiology, we figured out that there's these sicknesses going around. And so that's why that there was that's how it developed, that there was this like the Victorian age strict aversion or strict purity of sex, is because syphilis and other STDs got to be a big thing. So
Yeah.
basically, as that we evolved in our environment, there's always the parallel in our psychological environment. And that's why that there's always these metaphors like dragons and snakes and everything, just as far as like mythological metaphors, because that's what's going on, at least
Sure. Well, yeah,
on an
totally.
unconscious
No,
level.
I'm totally agreeing with. I vibe with that because again, if you or anybody
It,
else wants to go back and listen to the old podcast, it's like the Hall of Mirrors in our
right.
psyche and in the world and in the archetypes and in all this stuff. They're all just reflections of each other at different levels of reality, and
And
they're
I'll just make the brief point too, that because we're born, now in the 20th or 21st century, right away
information age.
we're gonna start learning things that are handed down about reading and computers and everything else that was not handed down information
Of
consciously,
course.
compared
Yeah.
to 100 or a few hundred years ago.
Mhm.
So
And so,
I do
yeah.
see the conscious evolution, but I
Well,
will say
conscious
too,
evolution happens, and maybe
yeah,
when we create the AI, like Neuralink shit, maybe we'll get to the level where we'll be born with previous memory. But the idea, the reason why I bring it all up
okay,
is because this sort of like language limitation, exoteric versus esoteric, having to come to
mm,
know something via your own experience versus like hearing about it in a metaphor, um, and then this
right,
evolution of our mental psyche
right,
over the course of history. I feel like that's why now we are at a level where we must, if we are going to survive, pull back a little bit from this materialism and reorient
oh
and
yeah,
amalgamate it with the old archaic worldview. Because in something like DMT and the Soul of Prophecy,
hmm,
this book right here, which is also written by Dr. Rick Strassman, the same guy who wrote DMT, the Spirit Molecule, he
hmm,
puts all he took all of his research from DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and realized when he was analyzing it objectively that the experiences that people were having in these headspaces, in these DMT flashes,
hmm,
while using intravenous fumarate DMT,
hmm,
they are analogous, completely similar to what he remembers reading of Ezekiel's vision in the Old Testament, of
right,
reading Jacob's ladder in the Old
right, right,
Testament, reading Old Testament prophetic wisdom. And so
hmm,
in this entire book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, he tries to connect the Old Testament prophets and their actual visions that they had with his actual experiment
hmm,
and the controlled environment the reported anecdotes that the people who were involved in that experiment, the things that they had seen.
hmm,
And to me, now today in the 21st century, our language is at a level, our understanding of our environment is at a level
right,
beyond what it ever has been, and it allows us to have conversations about metaphysical ideas and concepts in a
right,
way that has never ever happened before. And the reason why people hate dogmatic religion, such
hmm,
as Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, is because it literally took centuries of people trying to explain shit to each other and then people just following the exoteric order, trying to come to terms and trying to experience that religious experience for themselves. When today I could go on the dark net and order any drug that I want. I can
Right.
synthesize any drug that I want. I can go on the internet, type in a couple words, go to the right forum, figure out how to synthesize LSD or LSA from morning glory seeds. Like literally, I could do anything that I want to. And not only can I have those experiences because of the internet, I can actually have conversations with people like you who I don't even know, with the
Mhm.
language that I've come to intuit, with the experience that I've had in the 21st century, in a way where we can actually like truly do some real spiritual work that has
Right.
never been able to be before. And so that's the whole point of like why
Right.
I want to write some books, why I've been
Yeah.
working on the podcast thing, why I've been doing stuff
Well,
with you and
and
other
what
people.
what what I think of too is the old idea of the hero story, and what that really
The
is.
hero's archetype.
Yeah, what that's really about is that it's about an awakening and an evolution, so to speak, of any individual's consciousness. And the reason that's important and has always been important, but I think will always become increasingly important, is because so even if you go back to the shamanistic times of even thousands of years ago, there would be like a specific shamanistic order where they would select their village shaman when he's like a I don't know 13-14 year old, and
Yeah.
they would go through all those rites, and then
Mhm.
same thing in like even Catholicism might be a little bit different. In modern Catholicism, there'd be like
Yeah.
the priestly order. Now
Sure.
the problem with that is that it made this like select few of like these people are going to be the religious,
Yeah.
or like
The
super
zealots, like
conscious. Yeah,
the yeah, like the orderly sort of like the people we worship,
which
the saints.
and that's kind of that might have been
That's
what
another
you actually
reflection.
right, and that might have been what people to some degree or another needed, at least for especially when it was so hard to
To speak the
survive.
language, or
Well,
even or
and
maybe
even
survive, but
just to like our point earlier, how that it took all of our calories just to get enough calories to survive. And so then we would prop up a priestly order or a shamanistic order to say, okay, you like put out the vision of our spiritual
yeah,
path and all that.
yeah,
But now
exactly.
that anybody can have all this time and energy to do whatever that they want with, they could screw around, or they could emerge on the hero's journey to a
Sure.
higher consciousness, and that could be pretty much
Yeah,
anybody on different levels,
totally.
different ways. Uh,
So,
but we need to talk and have conversations, even just like this, and they're the ones that we work on, because it can be tricky, because you don't want to start down that path and then end up on some ego trip or all these different things
well, yeah,
that
I
can
mean,
come
that's
along.
just getting slayed by the dragon, honestly.
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
all that means. You didn't win. You didn't accomplish the hero's journey. You didn't actually come out successful. But that's
right,
okay.
right.
I feel like what you were just saying brought me to a an idea that the priesthood, right? This sort of select elite, has always existed and always will, unless like the entirety of the whole world sort of wakes up to its own divinity. Um,
Yeah,
where we always we always look out from ourselves, and we try to place blame on these people. We try to look to these people for guidance rather than like looking within,
right.
and taking responsibility, and all of these sorts of things for our own individuality as we build the collective.
Still listening.
But one time, Connor and I, we in our podcast episode on the daily discussion about religion, actually, we can you still hear me, by the way?
Yeah, I can. Just grab my drink.
Okay, we in our podcast episode on religion, I had discussed my idea again of archetype and of this hall of mirror reflective nature of the cosmos, and the priesthood is just another fractal patterning of the universe. It's a lower order societal reflection
Mhm.
or fractal of this nature of master and servant, which is funny that you bring that book up. I've never read it, but I think I'd vibe because I always have
Yeah.
this conceptualization of, my body, my mind, my egoic body is master to my arm functioning, but then there's like another order of my mind
Right.
being master to my ego, and there's always like levels of order of
Right.
like slavery in the world and in the
Right.
cosmos and in everything, where order and chaos fight each other, and there's this sort of duality and balance, but there's always this fractal pattern of every aspect of reality, and the elite priesthood is that in the social order. Just like in my
Right.
biological human BJ order, I
Right.
have that aspect of master, commander, like servant, and sort of like hierarchical process
Right.
that also exists in society, that also exists at the social, cultural,
Right. Right.
religious level, and just the same as every other thing we could ever talk about, because reality is this holographic, fractalized, crazy singularity,
You know,
which most materialists
it
don't ever
makes me
talk
think. It
about.
makes me think of this old religious idea of ultimately we can only mature by surrender. And
Yeah,
the reason that's important is because we want this illusion or self delusion that we're the master of so many things,
control.
or
Yeah,
we have so much control. And the thing is we have control, but the very limited control that we have is, and we're not gonna get onto the whole free will or determinism today necessarily.
sure.
That's
That's a whole
another
thing.
thing. Yeah. But the degree of will that we have is that we can surrender to doing what we know to do, or surrender to doing the right thing, or to do
Well,
the
that's like the
more,
Dharma,
better
right?
thing.
That's
Yeah.
like the Dharma. But
Right.
then we have to, but then there's levels to that too, just like
Yeah.
anything. But I like that idea of surrender. There's
Right.
also
Right.
this religious idea of salvation. There's this,
Right.
it's very Western, right? Because the Eastern philosophies don't really talk about salvation. I mean, of course, there's sort of like an ejection from suffering
Well,
or
it's more.
dukkha, but
It's similar, and they talk about ego death, which is kind of similar to,
sure,
as we
a
surrender. That's the
liberation.
repentance problem. Right.
Yeah,
It's
they
like
use the
surrendering
term
to repentance in
liberation.
ours. Right.
Yeah, and but to liberate from this cycle, which is why I feel like it
Right.
sometimes, to bring up what I said earlier, like it's not a
Mm.
school, it's a
Right.
prison. Sometimes I feel like that, but I mean that's just
Well,
me being a little pessimistic. But
let me try to clarify that real quick. Is that this ties into a couple things that you said earlier. I forget exactly how, but I was going to say earlier how that okay. Sometimes we talk about how what that we imagine, if there is a God or something like that, what it would be. This omniscient, omnipresent, omni everything thing. And the one
yeah,
thing that he would lack would be, um, he would just be all one with no limitation. And so, what, at least in a story mythological, trying to make sense of things idea, is the point of putting uh, humanity inside of what God is. And this is something Connor talked about a little bit earlier with sort of the Hebrew or Jewish perspective, is that we're these things inside of God, or this centers of consciousness inside of God. And sometimes I think of it as like we're nodes in that infinite divine
true,
network of
100%. We're
consciousness
cells. We're cells.
network.
Yeah.
Go
Mhm.
ahead.
No,
But
no. That's it. We're cells. We're
right,
nodes inside of the network of the collective.
right.
Go ahead though.
And well, and so the reason that's important is because, um, the more okay, so the more we accept what we have as limitation, but then transcend it when we can, and understanding all that we can, and rise above it, and our religious experiences and our abstract thinking and our contemplation and everything else, then we understand that dual aspect, but then also the unity
coming
aspect.
coming back to unity. So
Yeah.
sacred number and sacred geometry is this
Yeah.
big sort of new age misunderstood concept, and
Did you see
there's a
Pi,
very
by the way? Did you see the movie Pi?
The Life of Pi?
No, the movie. It's just called Pi.
Nope.
Okay, you would really love that movie. It's like this sort of artistic black and white movie from about 20 years ago. But
Sick.
yeah, it might be
I'll check it
4 hours
out.
on YouTube or whatever. But anyway, you would really like it. But it's mainly about the sacred number of pi and the sacred number
Oh,
of what is it? The
the
Fabricant
golden ratio.
number? Yeah, the golden ratio,
Is it?
exactly. Yep.
Dude, that's so funny. I legit have a book like literally right here on the table somewhere about the golden ratio. Where'd it
Yeah.
go? Oh my goodness. Oh, that's so frustrating when like it's literally on my table of books, but I have like 16 books on this table, so it's hard to find. But
Yeah.
the idea of that though, what you're just saying,
Okay. Yeah.
I really vibe with. So to
Mhm.
summarize, this sort
Mhm.
of, again, I really want people to go and you to go listen to some of the podcasts. I'll link it to you,
Yeah.
where we talk about unity and polarity. And actually, the two really good podcast episodes to watch would be me and Connor on the Daily Discussion talk about the Hermetic principles, the
Mhm.
7 Hermetic principles.
Mhm.
There's 2 episodes on YouTube, and episode 1 and 2. Go watch them. Here it is, book on the golden ratio. Just chill
Okay.
on my fucking desk. It's a
Just
wonderful book.
chilling. Yeah.
But yeah, so this idea of like unity and duality, always like going back to the unity, right? Always going back to one. Everything truly is one.
Right.
Uh, is represented in math. It's represented in the
Right.
number 0. And
Yep.
I'm gonna take like 2 seconds to go over this. Speed of light.
Yep.
Read my book if you want to get deeper insight into it. The number 0 through 10. Whether or not people make the argument that logarithmic base 10 math is the best way to do math or the only way to do math, or if we didn't have 10 fingers, maybe we wouldn't have log 10. But we do have 10 fingers, and we do because we are the amalgamation of the Godhead in the lower orders of reality. We are the map of the cosmos in our bodies. We are the Philosopher's Stone. We are Adam Kadmon. We are all of this stuff. But 10, the
Embodied
number
divine
0.
consciousness. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. The number 10,
Mhm.
0 through 10, is a sacred order that is a highly super esoteric understanding of the unfolding aspect of reality from unity, from infinite void to a singularity, to a
Right.
duality, to a multiplicity. And each number represents very vast levels of symbolism in which you will come to know the truth of the order of reality.
Right.
And the number 0, representing infinite nothingness, is actually a singularity. And we could talk for a while. That's why I said just read my book, so I'm going to go lightning speed. 0, which is actually a unity, which also at the same time represents infinite nothingness. The Kabbalists, the Judaic mystics, have a meditation where they think of infinite light. If you could think of infinite light, nothing but light, nothing would be discernible. It would be as if there was absolute nothingness, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so bright you could see nothing. And what you need to do in order to see something is to cast a shadow. And in order to cast a shadow, you need to have something that's not the light.
Right.
And so now you have you have light, you have something that's not the light, it's casting a shadow, and inside of the shadow you can discern difference. You can discern nuance. You understand truth. So through duality comes the third, or the multiplicity, right? From 0 comes the number 1. From infinite void comes somethingness.
Right.
Now we have this number 1. The number 1 is represented by a line segment that is connected between two actual points, 2 nodes. So two nothingnesses create one thing, and which is representative of 2 poles. So one wave function between 2 poles is the infinite unity. Okay, and there's your triangle. The number 1, which denotes 2 because it's created of 2 poles in a segment that runs between them. Infinity is a line segment, and in order to understand infinity and quantify infinity, to hang out in the shadow, so to speak, of the infinite light of infinity, we have to limit it. We have to give it limitation. So we limit the infinity.
Alan Watts talks a lot about this. But go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah, Alan Watts is beautiful. So you limit the line segment, and of the oneness, it denotes 2-ness. And now you have this 2-ness right? So you have two-ness, so you have two line segments, right? Which then themselves represent two different egoic bodies, but we've already agreed that there's oneness between them. There's one
Right.
faculty which gives both of them being, and so that's a number three. And then
Mhm.
and that's the triangle. It's the first ever like image that we have of geometric two-dimensional planar mathematics, Euclidean stuff, and
Right.
then so on and so forth. So now you have two, which we know that there's a unity. So then two and the unity are three, and three and the unity are four, and so on and so forth. And then we reach the number nine, and each of these numbers carries like so much symbolism. And number
Right.
nine wraps back up into the number one again,
Mhm.
and which goes back to zero. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, back to 1, 0, infinity. So between two zeros, between two poles of infinity, we have the numbers 1 through 9 with 1 repeating, which is a symbol in and of itself. It's a fractal pattern of always take the number plus 1, take the number plus 1, take the number plus 1. And this is the 0 through 0, 1 through 9 plus 1, bringing it back to 0. It's a very Pythagorean way of
Right.
understanding the more esoteric aspects of the universe, which the Hebrews encodified within their actual like language, like truly, literally within their language, and it's highly esoteric understanding that we should talk about some other time. But I'm also going to be
Yeah.
publishing in a book, so. But I just wanted to put that out there because of what you said, and it just reminded me of sacred number and sacred geometry.
Yeah, well, I would just say that's a lot, and I'll read that book and everything. So the way that I'm trying to remember the way that Alan Watts talks about it briefly, but it's just like, okay, he's giving a speech or whatever, like he's giving one of his lectures, and he's like, so if you look at me on the stage, you know it's me because of my form, of where my body begins and ends. So if
And I'm
you
not you.
well, yeah, it's not you and it's not anything else. So like if I don't know if he gives this example exactly, but also the idea is that if you were like, if your face was like right here in my chest, it would be hard to discern exactly what
Who you are, what you are.
yeah,
Yeah.
and if there were other people around and all these things. So we have all these divisions in consciousness so that we can in consciousness and form and reality, so that we can so that
Quantify
we
it.
that we
Truly.
can quantify. Really what we're doing is
Understand it.
we're quantifying the one. We're quantifying
Truly.
the
Yeah.
unity and the infinity.
Yeah.
So and it's, you can almost think of it as divisions of the divine,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah. It's holographic.
whether that's me or you or a rock. It's
Yeah.
some type of a
It's
division of the one divine.
It's all
Uh,
one. And so the holographic universe by Michael Talbot, the book that I brought up
right,
earlier, a hologram is something that is the same image, but cut down into two, it's the same image twice. Cut down into four, it's the same image
right,
four times.
right,
But
right,
eventually there comes a point in which the image is so small you can't discern, like it's a different image now from the first image,
right,
although it's the entirety of the first image. But at some degree, at some level, you can't discern that anymore, and it becomes something wholly new. And like a fractal.
right.
And there's a story of, and I've repeated it so many times, so many podcasts, I don't want to do it here, but exactly what you're saying, exactly what Alan Watts is saying, is that we come to know things from negative awareness, right? So like
Right,
the Kabbalists always talk about knowing God. Maimonides talks about knowing God through what God is not. So
right, right,
when someone says what is God, it's more pertinent to say what God isn't than what God is, because God is this infinitely vast thing that you can't ever describe. So we can describe it as what it is not. God is not this. God is not that. Um,
right.
and that's the
And
same thing with you or I. And Alan
well,
Watts also
and
gives. Go ahead.
let me make a point on that too. Is that this is another important point that what's his name, Ian McGilchrist makes in The Master's Emissary, but he's he gets more into it in other lectures, just because it's the book that he's working on right now. But it's that there are no things, there are only processes, in that
Yeah.
he
field
gives the
process.
well, yeah, he gives the example that there's like a mountain behind where he lives, and you could say like, look at that mountain, you can measure it and everything else. But if you could somehow time lapse, look at it over the past million or billion years or whatever, it's a process. And
Sure.
the same thing with each individual person, each individual thing, and then
Yeah.
especially if you try to quantify what something like the divine is or what God is,
Yeah.
it's
Oh yeah.
it's an infinite process in that
Hmm.
you like if you had like we'll say a religious experience, however that might come about right now, you could describe it and you could say all these things that happen in that moment, but that process of what of that consciousness or that uh, algorithm or however you want to define it is going to be there kind of zipping along in time and space. uh,
Sure.
Although it's tricky because it's
It's non-linear.
well, and it's hard to say really at that point if it is that thing is a process or maybe the divine or the logos you might call it is the one constant, but everything is experienced in a sort of process way because of how we experience time and space. Uh,
Yeah. So I mean
that might be more like it, but
that's almost like the mind body complex where we'll never
right,
know. Like we'll never
right,
know like the actualness, the actual truth of it. But the
right,
Kabbalists in their crazy,
right.
72 names of God and their 500 and something gates and all these things. I think of any of the religious ideas that we as Westerners can intuit and interface with, Kabbalistic philosophy, Judaic mysticism, is the closest we could get to the truth of the matter of the nature of reality itself from a religious, linguistic standpoint. Maybe with science and quantum physics and mathematics, we can get closer in this degree of thinking. But if you want to look at the world from linguistic, like left hand, sort of left brain thinking, artistic thinking, shapes, geometry, I would definitely learn some Hebrew and study some Kabbalistic texts.
Yeah,
I could share the names of some,
yeah, and I would say
but
too on that there may be we may have as good or better, maybe not, but we may have as good or better experience as those in the Kabbalic faith. That's not necessarily that saying that that's a fact, but to your point, I think that the division is being able to put it in language, so we can, and which is
sure,
kind of the
sure,
whole point of uh, today's streams was we have religious experiences, but one, what are the commonalities and contrasts between them, and then two, uh, can we do anything with them empirically, and how do we put that into ways that people
but
can uh,
that's hard, and that's
yeah,
part of the problem, though. The whole concept of like how do we put this into a way that is empirical
right,
is reductive. That's the definition of reductivism. Like
right,
reductionism is bringing anything down to try to fit it in a language that then can try to
yeah,
like quantify. And certain things cannot be, and
mhm,
that's one of the problems I think with atheists or with like actual materialist philosophers or like maybe atomists or people like,
right, right,
I don't know, some of the guys that are on your channel, is
yeah,
that yes, reality can be quantified. Yes, we can measure things. Yes, I can drive a Tesla which drives itself. I literally rode in a $75,000 Tesla like
yeah,
a week ago, and it was incredible. And the sort of way that they think about the world
mm,
brought us that ingenuity.
all right,
Elon Musk brought that to us, and it's real, and we can replicate that. So obviously, there's some tangibility to these concepts, but
mm,
there are such far out regions of conscious awareness, of truth, of you are you, and you didn't
mm,
like. How did you get here? Who are you? What is your
yeah,
purpose? What is the essence that literally brought this whole planet here? Like, what
right,
is that thing? And some of these concepts are so beyond what you could ever quantify in at least in mathematical terms. Maybe one day when we unify the left and the right brains, and we unify archetypal understanding with
Yeah.
mathematics, when we unify science with like archaic irrational mythological worldviews, and we sort of blend it all together in a cauldron of alchemical process where it births some hyper geometrical, hyperspatial
I
mathematical
don't know.
process,
Well, I
then
don't think so, but it's fun to think about. But okay, I think of it sometimes like this: is how I could put you in a room or whatever, or any person, and I could give that person infinite number of hours explaining how to go swim in a swimming pool, assuming they never have, or how to ride a bike, assuming they never
sure,
have.
then you have to
And
do it.
it won't really do them any good. They're gonna have to go out and experience their body in a swimming pool, or their body on a bicycle, and they're gonna have to like fall over or almost drown, or whatever the case. But eventually, this sort of the experiential connection puts it all together,
Yeah,
and
yeah. The
the
gnosis.
lesson, yeah, and the lessons from the teacher may have helped to, but ultimately, like, if it's the same thing. It's like, if you're gonna teach somebody how to swim or ride a bike, you don't really have to say anything. That just kind of helps them uh have peace about it, really.
So let's
But like,
let's say let's
it's
talk
the
about
same
that
thing
though.
with
So
spiritual experiences. Like, if you wanted to, like, whatever, be a guru or whatever, and that's another thing that Alan Watts talks a lot about. But you just have to have somebody go out and just have experiences, and eventually it starts to make sense,
yeah. Oh
kind of
yeah,
regardless of
truly.
what you taught them. But
But mathematics being a language, right?
mm,
Let's assume that language emerged later in life. Let's assume, because it's
mm,
an assumption, because no one
okay,
knows, that language is not the foundation of reality. Because that's my actual literal belief, but
yeah, it's a
like
tool.
a hyperdimensional language, like an actual hyperdimensional language, hyperdimensional geometry.
Mm,
But let's just assume that like the dead matter of the physiosphere emerged into the biosphere, which then emerged into like a mental plane, which then emerged into whatever else is spiritual and stuff going on forward. And
what's the
and
Ken Wilber term? The noosphere
yeah,
for that.
noosphere is how you
Yeah,
pronounce it. Yeah, the noosphere.
yeah.
Some people call it the new sphere. And let's just assume that that's how it evolved from physio, bio to nuo. And language is a higher level sort of emergent pattern that is less uh, pivotal and fundamental than dead
It's an
matter.
abstracted tool.
Yeah, it
It's a
comes
tool
from
engineered,
it's like it emerges from the
right?
processes of the biosphere and the noosphere. Uh, we'll make that assumption for this argument.
Sure.
When you say that you have to go and experience the world
Mm,
yourself
right, right,
through gnosis to know it, to know how to ride a bike. I could spend all day talking to you about it, but you still have to go do it. I
right.
agree. But the processes in which your brain body complex
Mm,
are interpreting the sense experience
mm,
and intuiting it in a way that like solidifies it and then makes it like through muscle memory, spatial awareness, memory of the event,
mm,
sort of like this process of how you're putting it all together as you as your consciousness is literal glue between what's actually happening
mm.
through time to create a crystalline sort of pattern in your brain, which is
Yeah.
ride a bike
And it's
and move
literally
the
that
pedals and move
crystallized
the bike.
knowledge,
Yeah, it's crystallized, and it's just move the pedals, ride the bike, spin the wheels, go for it,
right?
trajectory, path, velocity, all this distance, all this stuff. And I will make the argument that the
Mm,
faculty of language is what brings that all together to various degrees. You may
mm,
not have had like verbal language, but there's
right.
levels of language. There's levels of intuiting the world and the reality around you symbolically from day one of conscious awareness because of the emergent pattern of the fractalization of the
Mm,
unity consciousness. Because language is at the foundation of the very, very smallest aspect of all of reality,
right.
that language, that glue, which then it formatively like connects all the pieces and allows us to crystallize any formative pattern,
Mm,
is necessary. And that I guess where I'm trying to go with it is, as you were talking about it earlier, as you have to go and you have to like experience this thing,
Mm.
there's this duality between experience
Mm.
and understanding. There's a
Right,
duality of experience and knowledge, or data and information,
right, right, right.
and and actual experience.
Which,
And
but
these two things work hand in hand
right,
to
right,
formulate this this thing that we have, which is called mind, which is
right.
sort of like a thought loop of creative process, where it like creates itself, but then experiences itself, but then creates itself, looks at itself objectively,
Mm.
experiences itself subjectively, it creates itself objectively, experiences itself
Right.
subjectively, in this sort of like crazy soup of circular infinite process. And that is what dreams are, and that's what reality is, and that's what my neural pathways are allowing me to
Mm.
experience. It is the fundamental like quantum chaos of reality,
Yeah.
the order and chaos battle that's caught the Tiamat and the who is
Apsu.
Tiamat and
Is it
Absu, yeah,
Apsu?
Abizu,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's that thing, right? And so that's the unity consciousness, and I agree with
Yeah.
you on everything that you said, and that's the metaphysical foundation that I want to put out there for all of the materialist thinkers to start trying to wrap their heads around, is this nature of dreams, or life,
Mm.
reality, or you in your dream state. You are creating the
Mm.
reality with the functions of your brain while you're perceiving an objective world,
Mm.
but that objective world is requiring your brain to experience it to perpetuate its own objectiveness. They may argue that, but that's what Alan Watts says. Like, what is light without an eyeball? What
Mhm.
is it? Like what is heat energy without this thing that's my soupy body? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
what does it even mean? Like,
Well, it also on that same note, it's like and this is a little bit just sort of on the topic of education, but also staying on the same topic, is that oftentimes the problems with you get somebody all the way through a college degree, even a master's degree, even a PhD or whatever, and all they've done is memorize facts. Well, I
yeah,
mean, and like when I went to college a long time ago, that was my problem. I didn't learn. I was able to get through and get A's if I wanted to put in the work, but uh, it's just like fact. It's like taking some facts and regurgitate them.
yeah,
Where
regurgitating factoids. Yeah, like
right,
that's it.
where you can't really have learned anything unless you've had experience with it. So like that's why if you're really going to become uh some profession like a doctor, you're going to have years of hands-on
Practice. Yeah.
practice experience before that happens. So same thing with education. If you're going to really even learn anything, like learn about even history or learn about what a person is on any level, you sometimes we think
You have to
it's just
experience people.
right. Well, and we think it's just this like assimilation of facts, but
No.
it
Yeah.
it is it's all experience. It's just we're not always conscious of the experience, but the only time but so to really learn anything, we have to that's why like a good homework and good studying is like you really go and you like wrestle with information for hours and hours,
Yeah.
not just regurgitating it,
Exactly. And
regurgitating
that's what
you
people are doing though. Like, that's why I criticize scientism to be a new age dogma. But you
yeah,
speak to a trained scientist, like some of the people on Connor's channel or your channel, in
yeah,
the daily discussion and the daily archetype.
yeah,
There are so many people that just regurgitate the shit that they've read in a textbook, that they put to use maybe on paper theoretically with
right.
words and like maths.
It's almost
But
like an idol for them, like a false idol
yeah,
for
it
them.
is. It is. It is truly a dogma. But when you
Right.
tell them that, they will rebuttal and they'll say, "No, science is a method. Science is not a dogma. Dogma is this guy in the sky that I don't
Yeah.
believe in." They have this sort of weird, like, sort of
Well,
egoic,
I mean,
uh,
it is
what's the word? Ignorant.
it can be a
It is a method. It
well,
is,
it is, and so like I say, it's a
but it's
tool,
multifaceted,
right? It's a
just like the
tool,
religious experience.
right? So you can idolize true to some degree or false to probably a large degree, just about anything. Like you can make an idol of
Literally anything. Yeah.
literally any idea or anything. And so it'd be one thing if they said science is a nice tool, the end. But okay, the reason that they go to the ends that they do to talk about it the way that they do, one, it's partly it's just personality, temperament, but also it's just because
All
what
that
the
they know, all they've
well, no,
experienced.
but what it is it's just a destructive force, because all that it does
Sure.
is it takes apart
It breaks down.
it
Yeah,
just
it's
takes
reductive.
right. It doesn't add anything to the world. It just disproves everything.
Yeah.
Then what you're left with is just this tool.
It's a
And
husk. It literally it sheds things away. It's reductive.
right,
It's wonderful because that's how science works. Like
right.
Aristotle proved to us as one of the original thinking scientists
Mm,
that in order to understand anything, we have to limit it, right? In order to understand the infinity of God or consciousness or whatever, we put boundaries around it, and then we understand it by everything that it isn't. That was the most fundamental thing that he taught us. So he was the first person to categorize anything. So I said, I am a human, that is a dog, this is the genus, that's the family, that's the kingdom, like these sorts of ideas. And with these scientific reductionists, it's the same thing as what language does. With
mm,
language, I look at this wonderful thing, this thing that is so beautiful.
mm,
Has all these like experiences that I can have with it. It's this fucking beautiful thing. I
mm,
call it a book.
right,
I bring the infinity that it is, the potential of what it could be and what it is, and then I like symbolically represent it as one utterance. It is
right.
reduced to the utterance. And in my brain, when I see this one beautiful thing, I'm just like, book. And that's what it is to me. It's book. And the rest of the world is not book, but book is book. And it helps, right? Language is beautiful in that way. It allows us to get things done pragmatically, but it
Mm,
is reductive. And it reduces by cleaving off all of the infinite potentiality of that one thing and the way that I understand it. And we create those boundaries of
yeah,
language.
it's
And so,
like a carving away.
yeah, it carves. It carves. And that's really funny that you say that because the Kabbalists talk about the nature of creation as a carving
Right.
away from the infinity of God. It's they literally, like the word translates to carving.
Well, and
And this,
the sort of like artistic idea or metaphor that's sometimes used is that so we sort of this metaphor is that we have a inside of everyone is this like divine golden statue sort of thing, or it's just an image sort of metaphor. But what happens is when we carve away the world, and like we're doing now, and like that we parse up the world constantly, if we're doing it properly in experience, then really what we're doing is we're carving up ourselves, or
yeah,
we're carving up. It's because where people get confused or lost even in sort of maybe this false idolatry or materialistic sort of world is if it's just all about having things. I gotta have this, car and mansion and uh bigger screen TV and
woman
everything
or
else,
whatever.
whatever. Yeah, then that's cool, but
There's
it's
no
a
meaning either.
well, it's avoiding
Empty.
it's avoiding the carving away of yourself. Whereas
Yeah,
if you go out and you experience ideas and people on deep levels, and you are willing to go through the uh, cyclical process of
the
constantly,
hero's journey. Yeah,
yeah, and constantly destroying your ego and having to rebuild yourself, then you're carving yourself out into like a
sure.
something
That's
divine.
it's a very Freemasonic idea of carving
Yeah,
it's called the perfect ashlar.
all right.
The ashlar. It's a cube. It's literally
Yeah.
Metatron's cube, which is a hypercube, which is some next level shit that the
Oh yeah.
Kabbalists get into. And the Freemasons stole a shitload of their ideas from the Kabbalists and the Jews, and like literally all of Freemasonry is about rebuilding Solomon's temple through the correct orders and qubits and mathematical geometrical function that the Kabbalists talk about the nature of reality and God. Yeah, the Tetragrammaton, which is the one of the 72 names of God, which is Yod He Vav He, which is Yahweh if you say it, but like no one knows how to actually say it because it's like ineffable. But digressing a little bit.
That's in Pi too, by the way. You definitely like that movie.
Oh, that's sick. Yeah, I probably would then.
Yeah.
the perfect ashlar. So the Freemasons. So to divulge a bit of their philosophy and their symbolism, you've seen the compass, right? The compass with the G in it, and the ruler underneath it.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
seen that symbol. Everyone has seen it. And there's also a hammer. There's a hammer, not to be confused with the hammer and sickle,
Right, right.
but just the hammer.
Mm,
And so the Freemasons, they understand human beings, the collective of humans. Like if we're all cells in the body of Adam Kadmon, if we're all the cells of the body of the unity consciousness of human being, of the singular human in hyperspace at the end of time,
mm,
there is this concept of force and energy, and human beings are an actual representation in the physical form of this sort of like metaphysical energy, and it's called the blind force. And just the same as if you have like a steam engine on a train rushing forward on a train track to go somewhere in a direction by force of will. You have
mm.
to harness that steam. You have to harness the fire. You have to harness the coals and the
Limit it.
energy. You have to limit it. And if
What
you
is that
don't limit
limitation?
it,
Yeah,
yeah, if you just open up the vats and you open up all of the
right.
seams and you throw the doors open, all of your energy is lost and your train goes nowhere. It just broke down because your furnace is burned away instantaneously.
Yeah,
So it's this sort of like hard limiting of energy through
right.
the ruler. The rule is the means by which our willpower and our thoughts can focus and harness the will by the rule. We measure, we make sure that when we do things, we do them rightly through morality. We do things with the right conviction. We limit it properly. And then the compass is the tool by which we make the finer cuts. It's the tool by which we make the finer detailed inscriptions. We write with it language. We make circles. It's a highly mathematical symbol. And then the chisel and the hammer are the means by the force, the male masculine force by which we carve into the feminine of reality, into the womb. We sow the seed of thought. We punch down into it, and we, using the rule, the compass, the hammer, and the chisel, we take this rough stone, which is a symbol of humanity, being like a rough uncut gem, this beautiful thing, but it's not cut yet, and we cut it
Right.
down to this perfect cube of the dimensions that we have selected, so that we can be as close to perfect as possible, so we can reflect the divinity of the infinite unity, instead of being this sort of like uncut weird thing, which is of itself beautiful, but now we can be, through a force of will, which the will is a bridge between us and the divine. We are
Mhm.
being better. We're forming the perfect ashlar out of our own selves. Which I wanted to just bring up the Freemasonic stuff here, because the Masons have a ton of beautiful philosophy like that,
Mm.
that no one knows about, because of course it's secret, and it's an ancient order who gets their shit from the Kabbalists, and no one even knows about that. So I just wanted to shout that out, because you were
Yeah, yeah.
talking about something very similar.
That isn't that. There's also art. There's cubist art or cubanism art, or I don't remember the exact word that is on the same ideas, but the ultimate idea that's ties all that together. It's the same. There's this idea of a, I think it's a five dimensional cube called a tesseract, which is the
The
same.
Tesseract.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
same.
Metatron's cube.
Yeah, Metatron's cube. The this form that supposedly to, I don't know all the details of it, but
It's
basically,
the chariot of God, is
right.
what it
It,
is.
within that form is infinity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's a symbol that was concocted by the Kabbalists.
Right, right,
It's a five-dimensional
right,
cube,
right.
and it basically is a symbolic representation of the chariot of God. So although there's more dimensions than just the five dimensions, but the five-dimensional hypercube is the vehicle of God to enter into three-dimensional and four-dimensional time, such that God can manipulate the creation within the creation. So it's like if you were to build like a video game, right?
Right.
Like the video game itself has hardware and software, and you cannot just go into the hardware and start doing stuff and then somehow have a different character on
Yeah.
on the screen.
It's
You
like
have to go in.
it's like a portal.
Right, you have to
So
go into the game from the
right.
software, from the coding on the back end, and you make tweaks to the software. Maybe you make some tweaks to the hardware, but in order to actually like make this brand new character model with these new textures and these new like everything to pop up on the screen in
Well,
pixel versions
even
for
even us being in video version, that it does essentially the same thing. You know, it takes our physical image, puts it through a camera, and now it's in the computer software and broadcasted live. It's
right, and
doing
it's a representation, it's a reflection,
a
but
representation.
exactly, it's a shadow
Right.
or a
It's another.
reflection. And
It's a repetitive presentation. But yeah, go ahead.
and the further out that you make these representations, like somehow
Right.
if me inside of this computer could somehow then make another representation of me, that representation
You.
would be still me, but it would be so utterly different from what that me is in the camera and what
Mhm.
actual me is. That's reality. It's all reflections of reflections. When some
Right.
aspects of reality are closer to the unity consciousness than others, it's all sort of a soup of oneness, but some things are more fundamentally like similar, sort of like frequency resonant than other things as it all propagates and gets more nuanced over time. But the reason why I bring this video game idea up is because like
Oh,
we can't just go edit the hardware and then somehow have like new shit appear inside of the video game. We have to like use the new hardware, but then do things inside of the domain of the actual software and
yeah.
actually inside of the domain of the actual code to
Mhm.
make nuance occur in the game space. And
Right. Right.
that's sort of like how reality works according to the Kabbalists when they talk about God. So
Mhm.
in their old archaic like desert people language, right? They can't use the metaphor of a computer and zeros and ones and binary and software and hardware. They have desert language, desert people. So
Right.
that's why we get these dogmas that these scientifically
Yeah.
minded individuals hate so much. But just to bring it back to home really quick, the Kabbalists have this concept of the tree of life. It's called the Etz Chaim, the tree
Mhm.
of life. There's a dualistic tree in the metaphysical space of reality, which
Mhm.
one is the tree of life and one is the tree of knowledge. And the tree of knowledge is what we ate from, which we then underwent this transformative process and then gained the knowledge of duality, which Jordan Peterson talks a lot in his biblical series, in his own sort of Jordan Peterson way. But if you
Yeah.
study the actual, like the real source material of the Judaic mystics, they talk about the tree of life, the tree that actually brings propagation, the tree that brings manifestation,
The,
creationism, reality from
the
nothing.
source of fruit.
Yeah,
Is it,
exactly. That
and
that which
so like yeah, you could call it. Well, it's also paralleled with the philosopher's stone and a lot of other
yeah, totally.
things
The
in
prima
alchemy.
materia, at least
Right. The
the
material.
prima materia, which is the ultimate like soup of oneness that all things come from. Um,
Yeah.
which the prima materia idea goes like this: like let's say at the very top of reality, as far up in the metaphysics as we go, all the way to the very beginning of creation, if you've
Mm.
got oneness that becomes two-ness, like if we want to talk about maybe there's more than one God, okay,
Mm.
well if there's God A and God B, what about God A and God B makes them sovereign? What's the energy that makes God A allowed to be God A and God B allowed to be God B while they both sort of balance each other?
Mm.
Whatever that middle pillar is that gives balance, that Vishnu pillar or whatever you want to call it if you're a Hindu,
Mm.
that middle pillar has to be, they both have to be made of the same shit. Like
Yeah.
you can't, unless at least in a linear sort of trying to quantify it from a human perspective, this has to be made of the same shit as this if they both want to be like their own weirdness. So
Yeah.
but really quick to bring it back to home,
Mm.
Metatron's cube, hyperdimensional 5-dimensional cube.
Tesseract. Yeah.
Yeah, the Chariot of God, which in the Marvel movies, Stan Lee created the hypercube to be a or in the Marvel comics, it was like the thing that you could use to manifest anything you wanted, right? You could use it to literally create anything from your own thought form, which is what the Kabbalists say God
Are you
did.
talking about Avengers or Transformers?
I think it's Avengers. It's not the Infinity Stones, but it was the actual Tesseract, which was
Okay.
one of the stones,
Okay.
right?
I don't know. It gets confusing because there's the Tesseract, which is the cube in Transformers, and then there's the Infinity Stone. And I don't know if the Tesseract is involved in.
I thought it was
Anyway.
called the Tesseract, but either way, the Tesseract is
Anyway.
is this idea of like being able to take your own thought form, filter
Mm,
it through this machine, and then it literally spits out whatever you think. Like whatever you think, it then just does it through this like propagation system. The Kabbalists talk about the tree of life, which is this
mm,
concept of like these 10 nodes on the tree, or the sphera, the sphirot, the sephira, if you say it in English. And these nodes are representations of God, but they're also aspects of humankind. But they're
right.
also symbols of nature and of reality across all the spectrums. And it's also a mathematical representation of the number 10, the
Right.
logarithm. It's so many things all at once. And as you travel from the nodes on the tree of life in a sort of zigzag lightning pattern, and you do these meditations that the Kabbalists talk about, you'll gain insight into the esoteric nature of creation. And
Mm,
God uses these sphera to speak with the creation or edit the creation. But the
mm,
Kabbalists understand that God is not the nodes or the
mm,
tree or the people. God
right.
is wholly outside of the entirety of creation, but God interacts with the creation
Right.
through the Sephira, or the
Mm,
Sphirot, or the Tree of Life, just in the same way that I am not the video game, but I can go in and tweak the video game, but I can't do it from the hardware. I have to go through the hardware, into the software, into the code, fuck with
mm,
it, and then now, bam, now there's some nuance. Now I've created a new program, I've created a new system, a new tool,
right.
whatever. And it all works in tandem, but
Mm,
there's levels by which you like, as a video game character, you can't understand what hardware even is, because you're
mm,
pixels, you're light energy, you're literally made of light information, pixels
right.
on a screen through coax nodes and shit, or digital nodes or whatever. And then you go one step further, and then you're zeros and ones, duality. Then you
Right.
go a little bit further, and then now you're actual like big software, which is all one soup of oneness. Then you're really actually hardware, but actually you're really just like weird atoms that got put together by the mind of some other guy who's some other atoms. But then in actuality, those atoms are the same atoms as that guy, just tweaked differently. So like there's levels and levels and levels and levels and levels, and we have to use certain methods to get deeper into the nuances of the deeper levels that of the realities that we've created. We can't just snap our fingers and do it.
It's like
And
it's
that's
a holarchy.
it's a holarchy, yes, and in the holarchy is a hierarchical patterning.
Right.
And in order for me as a human being who created this video game to get down here and change the actual pixels and the images of what this game character looks like, I have to go through the hierarchy and then change it, and then come back up the hierarchy and then play the game with my video game controller. That's kind of like how the Kabbalists talk about God in the Tree of Life and the 72 gates, and or the 72 names of God, the 512 gates. It's a process of God coming into reality
Right.
through us, through the collective, doing things in
You are.
reality at the level of reality,
Yeah.
and then going back up and then sort of like reaping the rewards of it, which is a very metaphysical concept. Same thing of like reincarnation and life being a school or a process, or all these things. If you've ever seen like the egg, if you've ever read the book The Egg, or if you've watched the Kyrgyzakt video of
Mhm.
the egg, have you ever seen that video?
Oh, no. I was thinking of the metaphysical or the alchemical.
The
Uh,
Orphic egg?
yeah, but I haven't
Yeah.
read that book.
So there's a YouTube video by a channel called Kyrgyzakt, which is a
Mm,
pretty cool channel. They like take cartoony sort of visuals, and then they put like philosophical or historical or whatever like verbiage behind it, and then they give it to the masses. And there's this
okay.
one called The Egg, and in The Egg, the concept is like this guy dies, he gets like hit by a car or something, dies, goes to like heaven, meets God. God kind of like shows him this whole thing that's happening in the spirit world. And he's like, whoa, that's crazy. God tells him that he's just a part of God. And he's like, oh, I'm going to forget all this stuff again. And he's like, don't worry. You're going to reincarnate a billion kajillion times in the future and the past. You're going to be all people. Everyone who has ever been, you will be, because you are my child. And then as soon as you are everyone for all of time, from the beginning to the end, then you will be an adult, and by the time that you're an adult, you will be just like me, and then you can come join this world of gods. Then you can be one of us in our society. Like, you get to be here once you grow up, and to grow up you have to be all people through all time, always. Then you can be us. And that's like reality, kind of. That's like the duality and the
Well,
multiplicity.
let me good stuff, but let me try to get more personal, and then we'll start to wrap it up.
Sure.
But one thing I wanted to kind of get at is just hear a little bit more of your, well, and like I said, I'm going to do a few of these over the next few weeks if I can, with a few different people,
Sure.
but
Sure.
just get an idea for how different people have what would quantify their, what they'd call religious experience. And some of that might be just in life, and some of it might be through psychedelic drugs, some of it might be through meditation, and all the
Sure.
other various forms. So I guess if you could just give me
Like,
some of your,
summarize it.
yeah, well, and just give me some of your experiences, and maybe how the different forms of those experience, whether it's uh, how that they compare and contrast, whether it's
Sure.
on psychedelics or just in some type of
Sure.
meditation or whatever else. If you could just
So
give
I'll
me,
try and be
and,
brief
well,
about it.
and in a mostly experiential level, if you
Okay.
can.
Instead of a mental level or thinking about things or reading a book.
Yeah, less extraction and more is your
Like
personal
actual experience.
experience. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I want to preface this by saying, like, really fast, like, going back to everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
I always go back to source. I always go back to fractal patterns of oneness, right? All
Mm,
things in reality are just reflections of reflections of reflections, or fractals of fractals.
mm,
So okay, here's my experience. I mean, like, growing up as a kid,
mm,
I grew up in Savannah, Georgia.
mm,
I'm from Washington State, which is way over here in the country, and then I moved all the way to Georgia, which is this other side of the country, and then I moved back when I was a teenager. So, born in Washington, grew up in my formative years in Georgia, went back to Washington for my teenage to adult years, and now I just moved slightly this way to Idaho.
mm,
Two poles of the nation. In
mm,
Georgia, I was a minority. I was like there were only like 5 or 6 white kids in my whole school of hundreds. I hung out with mostly African Americans. I was deeply ensconced in that culture. Played basketball, super into rap music, dressed kind of like a little wankster kid. Did all this stuff. Tried to be cool. Had that experience, and then I moved to Washington, where I had like 2 black friends, and everyone was white, and I was very uncomfortable, and I had to like figure out my life and figure out who I was. I was 14, 15, started smoking weed at 14. Uh, in Georgia, before I moved to Washington, I picked up a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman. Got heavily into the concept of psychedelics and studying psychedelics, going to arrowwid.com and the DMT Nexus and all these other websites when I was young. So I experienced this duality of life, right? This looking at life this way, looking at life this way, being exposed to 2 completely polar opposite extremes. Um, and then having psychedelics when I was 14, smoking weed for the first time. I was born and raised Baptist Christian. I did Bible study like 3 times a week. I was super into Bible study. I could recite scripture today still from when I was a kid, even though I haven't actually studied the actual Bible in a long time, other than my Kabbalistic Old Testament stuff.
mm.
But psychedelics, smoking weed when I was 14, opened up my noggin to this whole other way of looking at reality. It was my first actual real experience of reality is not always what I'm experiencing, because obviously I just ingested this one substance, and now my actual perspective, how I see the world, literally what I'm looking at, looks different to me. I'm
Right.
literally perceiving it differently. How I feel about it, what I have to say, these ideas they're coming to me. Oh my goodness, this book, this is crazy. Psychedelics are crazy. And then my first psychedelic drug experience when I was 15 years old was Salvia divinorum, and I had studied it for 2.5 years. It's a dissociative substance. I smoked it 3 or 4 times before I actually had a breakthrough experience. Complete ego death. Talk about an experience in which all 5 senses are obliterated, yet you're still experiencing something. You are experiencing something after all of your normal senses have been obliterated. That was the first time for me that I realized like life is so much more complex than what I ever could have imagined, and it's hard to bring that back because uh, imagine experiencing something without actually having five senses at all, and then trying to talk about it. Makes no sense. Um,
Mm.
so then moving forward in life, I started studying. The majority of my religious experiences have been with DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, ketamine, um, you know, uh, salvia divinorum, of course. I've never done anything like mescaline or anything. I've done a couple of other things, MDMA, different analogs of all of those different drugs, um, things here or there, ayahuasca analogs and stuff, different things. And I've never been one to sit and meditate. I used to practice lucid dreaming.
Mm.
I've never sat and actually practiced meditation,
Mm.
mindfulness, or like mental clearing, but I have practiced lucid dreaming via the wild technique, which is very similar to meditation because you sit in silence and you sort of like fall asleep while you maintain an active mind. So that
Mm.
way, once your body falls asleep, your mind is active, and the dream state will literally wrap itself around your conscious awareness while you've been aware the whole time, and like the dream forms literally right in front of you, and then you're like, okay, cool, I'm lucid dreaming now. It only took me 3 hours of sitting still for this to happen. Now I can control my dream space. And then
Mm.
doing experimentations with like repressed memory or astral projection or all of these things from the lucid dream state. I practiced those, but
Mm.
not actual meditation. So I'd say the majority of my like metaphysical experiences have come from psychedelics and lucid dreaming and
Mm.
dreaming in general. But then I always would remember to like metacognitively think back about my dualistic upbringing, my upbringing in like this level of life down here in Georgia and this level of life up here in Washington, and doing this crazy drug stuff, and then
Mm.
becoming hella clean and getting married and working for the government for 7 years and being keeping my nose super clean and not touching anything. And I've experienced life from like all these quadrants. Like
Mm.
for a while there, I was like poor, making my money through illegal ways that I won't repeat right now. Um, and now I'm like, I'm more wealthy than I've ever been. I'm very comfortable in Georgia. I grew up with these kids, and my life was like this, and now my life is like that. Like I've experienced so many extremes and polar opposites, and then in my actual reality. And then I think that like reading the books, doing the psychedelics, having the
Mm.
dreams, all helped to be the glue between the diverse experiences that I've been lucky enough to have, and then I've contextualized those diverse experiences
Mm.
through that channel of psychedelics, through that channel of dreaming, through the channel of reading abstract philosophical texts, major world religions, stuff like
Mm.
that, and then just spending all day thinking about it. Um, so that's like where my foundation is psychedelics, dreaming, and then philosophy and reading and
Did
great major world religions and
you
stuff.
have any religious experiences in a, I don't know if not
Like,
necessarily church, but a church
yeah,
or
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
or
for sure.
a prayer type thing where
Yeah,
at least where you're thinking of it as uh and maybe it's more like what people traditionally think of when they say religious experience of like having a experience where you feel like you have uh touched divinity, even if that's just like your perception of it.
sure, yeah. Okay, so like when I was in college, I went to a couple of places. I went to like a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple. I practiced some. I guess I practiced meditation like a handful of times because I went to these places. I don't practice them in my home or anything like that. Um, and nothing really significant happened during those times. But there were times where I was a kid. I remember um, where I would go to church. Like I had these experiences where I went to church and I'd be extremely tired,
Mm.
but rather than going to like the kid zone where they would take like Awana kids to go do
Yeah.
like kid study, I would hang out with my mom and dad in the large congregation, and we went to a big church,
Mm.
highly funded, a lot of money, Baptist church,
Yeah.
but they were really serious about their faith, and very orthodox.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was really trying to listen and gain the word of God and like gained gain the knowledge, and I wanted to impress my mom and dad, and I wanted to do all these things, and I felt proud of myself. And I turned and looked in the crowd over to the left near one of the deacons who was sitting waiting to collect some tithes, and the pastor was preaching, and everyone was like really vibing, really feeling it. And there was this woman there, this dark-skinned African American woman who was like looking at me, and she was like glowing, and she was like smiling and shaking her head in approval or appreciation of my uh, vigor for how excited I was, and all I got from that was like, yes, like I'm doing the right thing, that I'm like literally this is what I should be doing with my life. I should be trying to understand the greater wisdom of God. And then like just because she was looking directly at me, letting me know with her giant smile and head nod right at me while everyone's looking at the pastor and everyone's vibing with the pastor, she is looking directly at me. And then like I'm like, I get self-conscious. I'm like 9 years old, and I'm like, oh, this lady's like looking at me, and I look away for a brief moment, and then I look back, and she is gone, like gone, does not exist, gone, literally like 2 seconds. And I was like, holy shit, like that was an angel. And so when I was a kid, I had this like perception that an angel of mine, one of my guardian angels, had given me approval or something like that. That was one of my like actual religious experiences that I had in church. That's one of them. And to wrap this all up really fast with one more statement, when I lived in Georgia, I lived in Savannah, which was a highly haunted location, whether or not you believe in ghosts or spirits or demons or negatively vibrating entities or whatever you believe or don't believe in. But statistically, for the people that do believe in the hype, Savannah is one of the top 10 haunted cities in America, probably because of all of the evil shit that went down in the last 400 years with slavery and the Civil War and all of this other stuff. There's a lot of energy that's being held there, and sadness and negative vibes and death and rape and all this stuff. Whether or not you buy into it, I was a kid in a house where the entry room, I swear to God, there were like actual Satanists who lived in my house or something, or witches, because right when you walk into the home, to the left, from the ceiling to the floor, from the wall to the wall, and the entry area, about 10 feet long and about 10 feet tall, just like a normal room, was a mirror, like one of those old, like carbon sort of what are they, copper outlined mirrors, literally from the carpet to the ceiling and the wall to the wall, a giant mirror. And it was a very old mirror, like from the, I don't know, like mid-century 1900, maybe like 1910 or something like that, maybe even older. There's an old house. It was made of brick and stuff. It was one of the oldest houses in that area, right next to the wood line. So I imagine like perhaps like some 1800-year settlers sort of like lived there of some sort. And in that house, there was like this, it was a long one-story building, and there was this huge sort of section of the house where all the bedrooms were that made like an L shape. It was like the master bedroom, guest room, my sister's room, bathroom, living room, dining room, then like this like super long sort of other guest play spare room with like a garage attachment. It was this like long house. In the bedroom section, there were no mirrors whatsoever, no natural light whatsoever, and I experienced multiple times demonic entities, like a singular demonic entity, where it was I could spend maybe an hour or two and some other podcasts describing to you the experiences that I've had. But later in life, my sister who lived with me, who is 7 years older than I am, told me of things that I would do, like weird shit. I used to run around. I used to freak my parents out because I would literally like run top speed throughout the house in my sleep, screaming at the top of my lungs. I remember having vivid, hyper, like crazy night terrors and all these crazy things, vivid dreams of the circles of hell. Like now I realize it's the circles of hell, but as a kid, at 6 years old, I had no idea what the hell that was, with Iron Maidens and people being ripped apart and like literally tortured and then brought back to life by these Iron Maiden demons right in front of my face, and then carted all naked men and women being like literally torn apart and then put back together, and then torn apart and then put back together, and like dreams like this and waking hallucinations of this thing for years. And then I moved to Washington and then never experienced it ever again for 3 or 4 years. I was 17 or 18 years old, and I started to experience these things again. Like it followed me to this place, and my sister,
Like your dreams or waking dreams?
like waking hallucinations started happening again when I was like 18 years old. And there was my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, had this very scary experience, I guess, where like one time I was dropping her off from a date and we were outside, and it was like the sun was going down, and we used to have this ritual where we'd like hug and cuddle and kiss in her driveway for like 5 minutes, and then I'd leave. I was like 17. And I guess like one time we're hugging, cuddling, kissing around the time that I had started having these waking hallucinations. And she had been telling me that I'd been acting different for a couple of weeks. Like, I don't know what's wrong with you. You're different. Like, I'm like, what do you mean I'm different? She's like, you're different. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And during this one interaction, I tried to kiss her, and she looked up and like jumped out of her skin, like jumped out of her skin and was like, I can't, like, I gotta go. And I was like, what's wrong? And then she didn't talk to me for like 3 days. She's my wife now, though. She didn't talk to me for like 3 days. I asked her later on in life, like, what that was all about. She said that when she had looked up at me, my eyes from corner to corner were dark, black, pitch blackness. Blackness. And I was like, what the fuck are you, like, what? And then that stuff was happening, right? Like all these weird things in my life. I was feeling these weird dreams. I would wake up with night terrors again. I was having recurring dreams from when I was a kid. I haven't experienced these things in forever. So I called up my sister. My like girlfriend's freaking out. I called my sister, who's a shaman. She's like a Reiki master. She, you know, whether or not people buy into the shit, like she had experience like communicating with angelic beings and doing like ritual magic and stuff. And so I asked her, I was like, dude, do you remember this shit from when we were kids? Like, I didn't talk to you a lot about this, but do you remember this, and this? And she was like, oh yeah, like I remember this, and this, and you would do these things. And she basically confirmed my experiences that I never talked to anybody about.
Wow.
Things that I would do as a kid and stuff, like that were like things that were like straight out of a Paranormal Activity movie. And she told me like she could be a medium between me and this demonic entity. And I said, okay, because I was freaking out and I was scared. I was about to lose my girlfriend. I felt like I was crazy. I didn't know what the hell was going on. Wow. So she does this medium sort of like ceremony, and take everything I'm about to say like with a grain of salt, because I didn't experience it or hear it or see it. She claimed, my sister claimed to, as she like mediumed between me and this thing. She like communicated between me and it was basically coming here in Washington from Georgia to me after it left me alone for like 5 years, because it needed my acceptance, forgiveness, and approval in order to literally ascend to the next level of the spirit world. So that way it didn't have to be a demon anymore, and it could like release itself from its shackles of being a demon and be something a little bit better. But it needed to like do things on its path, and I was one of those things. So I accepted it. I was like, I love you, you're cool, forgiveness.
You're cool.
Like, it was like one of the first radical forgiveness experiences that I ever like had in my life, where I was like, wow, this thing, whether or not it's real, my perception of it caused me so much pain and like terror growing up, and I love you, and I let you be you, and I forgive you because you just are a product of whatever shackles are holding you down. I let you go, like it's all released, like gone, go do what you got to do in life. And it thanked me and offered a gift. And the one thing that I could perceive from this experience, it was a flash of like a vision in my head, because it was all a closed eye, like sort of ceremony seance type thing. And this vision was a long, dark black obelisk. It was an obsidian, it was like obsidian obelisk that came into my solar plexus. And it was like, thank you, deuces, and it left forever. And I'd never, ever experienced this thing before. And the last thing I want to say about another person sort of like corroborating this thing, it the way that it looked. Have you ever seen Death Note?
Yeah.
The anime?
Yeah.
You know Ryuk, the really tall fucker? Ryuk,
yeah,
the main
10
demon?
feet tall.
It looked so similar to Ryuk. Like when Death Note
But
came out and I was a kid,
mm,
I like literally almost shit myself because I was like, that thing is the thing that's been haunting me for years. The thing was tall,
but
lanky, and
how
skinny.
did you see it?
So I saw it with waking
Like in a
eyes
like a
multiple times.
dream kind
No,
of
like one time one of my
hallucination
no,
or
like
whatever.
one time one of my best friends, and I don't experience waking hallucinations in life like ever. I'm a
Mm,
very sane person, I feel, at least in that regard.
yeah.
But one day, like my friend James was over, my best friend. We were playing Call of Duty 2, and on Call of Duty 2, you run around shooting people, but there's
Mm,
a snake mini game. You know, like the snake, and you run around trying not to eat yourself, and you eat the little the ball, and then a new ball happens, and you have to go out and eat the ball, and then a new. You know the snake game. We're playing the snake game, which was a mini game inside of Call of Duty 2, which we thought was fucking phenomenal.
okay.
And as we're playing this game, it's dark. He's sitting to my
Mm,
right in my bedroom, and we're playing together. And I look over and I'm laughing with him, and I glimpse to the right, and
mm.
behind him on the wall is like a 12-foot shadow hunched over. And I like briefly look at it for a moment, and I see it for what it is, and it's Ryuk. It's literally Ryuk. But Ryuk
Wait,
didn't exist yet. Death Note
it,
didn't exist.
is this the guy that you had to love and forgive, or is it?
This demon fucker, yeah, this is
Yeah.
the guy. The guy that I
Okay.
forgave and let go.
This is before he was able to ascend.
Much before. I was like 8 years
Okay.
old when this happened.
Oh, okay.
And it was I was like 17 when I forgave it and let it go. But
Yeah.
he he was like hunched over like
Mm.
like this, like hunched over on the wall, and he like
Yeah.
turned his head
Just
like
like he does in Death
like
Note.
yeah, Death Note. Dude, Death Note like freaked me out. He was like this, and he goes
Yeah.
turns his head, and he has like this smile, and
Yep.
his whole body
That's Death
is
Note.
his entire body had golden what looked like Arabic writing, like all over it. His whole body had like circular, like Arabic writing. And I saw this with my fucking eyes. I didn't even know what Arabic was when I was 8 years old, but like
Yeah.
remembering it, it was Arabic. And and this he like and I like jumped out of my fucking skin. I was like, oh my god. And my friend James like jumped. He was like, dude, what? And I was like, nothing. Let's just keep playing the video game. Because at this point, I've been dealing with this dude in my dreams. I didn't see him very many times. Like he would always just like fuck with me in my dreams and make me have these terrible nightmares. Like one of them was the recurring circle in hell dream. But then we kept playing the video game, and I literally saw him again and jumped out of my skin again. My buddy James jumped out of his skin. And I experienced multiple waking hallucinations in that house, lucid
But
dreams.
only you saw him, right?
Oh, I was the only one who saw him. My sister experienced things but never saw anything. She was a lot older than me. My parents never believed me. They made me get my tonsils removed because of how much I would like sleep run in the house and do crazy shit when I was asleep. My sister, one of my other sisters who never experienced any of this stuff, she didn't live there.
Mm.
When she would come to visit and sleep with me, she said like she'll never sleep with me again when I was a little kid because I would do weird shit like just like sit straight up in the middle of the bed in the middle of the night and stare at her, or like if she was asleep in the other room, I'd get up and walk over, stare at her from the bed. When she would wake up and ask me like what I was doing, I would say waiting for you, and then she would like tell me to go to bed, and I would just like walk and turn and go back to bed. All these crazy things that I had not done since I was like a little child.
Did you remember those, or you were like
No,
unconscious of them?
I have no recollection. My mom and dad will tell you stories all day about how I literally would run at the top speed that I could run in my dream state around the house and freaking the fuck out, and they just didn't know what was going on. But that recurring dream of the circles of hell and of what I would say Dante's circles of hell are, about the fifth or sixth time that I had that dream where the Iron Maidens were like chasing me to torture me and stuff, a literal fairy popped out of the wall. Not like one of those fairies you see on cartoons. One of those like woodland creature, almost grasshopper looking humanoid fairies came out of the mucous membrane, which is like the inside of a throat, which is this humid fucking dark, hot as fuck, wet membrane wall that I'm running around in these tunnels, and it like pops out of the fucking wall and literally teaches me how to become lucid in a dream. And that was the first time. That was the first time that I learned how to do it. It gave me like this knowledge. It was like close your eyes, count to 3, feel this way, do this, open your eyes, and you'll wake up. And I did. And I used that. Like that's how I began to learn to lucid dream when I was a kid. and all this crazy stuff, and it's all coming to a head.
Did you ever have any like paralysis
Oh yeah.
or like where it seems to affect you, like it had a bodily effect on you as you went from not just moving around, but like you went from asleep to awake,
Sleep to awake.
but you felt it in your body.
Yes. So there were times where, I would wake up from a nightmare and go to my parents' bedroom, and my dad would get pissed and my mom would let me come sleep in between them. I'd be like 8 or 9 years old. My dad's mad that I'm trying to sleep in between them. And I'm so thankful. I get in bed, fall back asleep, wake up with like half awake, half asleep, like vivid waking dreams where the entity would be in the shadow of the corner in my parents' room, and it would like eat my fear, and I couldn't move, and it would just like eat my fear, and just it was like the worst feeling because I couldn't move or do anything, and it would just like feast on me. And I would have that would happen so many times, things like that. But I'm not afraid of it now. I'm not afraid of these things. I've forgiven it. I figured if like anything like that were to ever happen to me again, I know how to handle those situations and things like that. And I don't open doors. That's why I don't practice actual magic, but I've studied Renaissance magic. I've studied high ritual magic. I have actual alchemical treatises. I have actual like black magic tomes in my house. I have these things that are in my library, but I don't practice ritual evocation because I've literally experienced the shit in real life, and I'm not about to open doors ever again if I can help it, because I believe in the shit just because I've experienced it. But whether or not it was like fragments of my actual psyche, this thing came to me begging me to forgive it at a future date in my life when I wasn't really able to see it by myself, but I forgave it. It gave me a gift, and then my hypothesis is that the gift that it gave me has actually directly led to a recurring series of DMT experiences that have led me to believe that the nature and characteristic of reality is what I believe it to be. But that's for another discussion because it's a wild story. But the last thing that I do want to say before we wrap it up is that one of my friends, his name is Dante, and he's a short, stocky, black, buff dude. And Dante is very spiritual. He meditates daily. He's into some weird kind of new agey, wacky shit. Whether or not what he believes is true or not, it's not for me to decide. But he definitely claims to have some higher levels of knowledge of the spiritual nature of reality. And he would come to my house a lot because we'd rap and stuff, and he was part of my circle of friends who would always be kicking it with me at my mom and dad's house, and we'd go and get into some shit in the world. And one day he was at my house, and it was after I had done this whole forgiveness thing, right? After I had like forgiven this thing and let it go. We ended up getting onto the topic of discussion of spirits and demons and angels and all these things. And I had told him a little bit, not as much as I told you tonight, but I told him a little bit of things. Definitely didn't tell him what it looked like, that it looked like Ryuk from Death Note. And we had been talking, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I've seen it." I was like, what do you mean? He was like, yeah, I've seen it because my parents in their house, they had this old wicker furniture, this old antique white wicker furniture with all these weird antiques. And my mom, everywhere we moved in life, she would bring it. And wherever room that wicker furniture was in would always be the room that I would never want to be in at night by myself. Ever. No one did. Not even my girlfriend. No one. It was like, no, man, fuck that room over there with that wicker furniture because it's cold and it feels weird and I feel like someone's watching me. Everyone felt like that. And that was the wicker furniture that was in the room where the giant mirror was in, where I'm pretty sure that's where like the rituals were done in the very beginning of the house's life. But he told me, he was like, yeah, I've seen it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, down there in the room with that stuff. And I'm like, what does it look like to you if you've seen it? Because I thought he was just bullshitting with me. And he was like, nah, it's like really tall, right? And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, it's super tall and skinny, right? It's a dude, right? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, I've seen him. I haven't seen him in a long time, though. And it was like 2 years later. I was like 19 or 20. And after I had like forgiven it and stuff, I've never talked to him, never talked to anybody really about it. And he was like, yes, I've seen it. It's a tall ass skinny dude. I haven't seen him in a while though, And so I was like, you're blowing my mind, bro. So there's like levels of corroboration of people in my life to certain
Mm.
degrees of different levels who have or haven't experienced this thing that I would call a demon. And um, yeah, and it was crazy. So there is a religious sort of series of experiences that I've had
Mm.
without drugs and without anything that I've never experienced since. And to this day, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, will not stay in that room by herself
The
just because
Wicker
she,
Room.
yeah, she remembers it. Like, she went to visit Washington recently without me because she had some business there. She's from there too, even though we live in
Mm.
Idaho. She stayed with my parents by herself with her grandma, and she was like, hell no, dude, like, I won't fuck around with that room ever again. And I was like, well, whatever. But that's my religious, like, negative religious experience
Okay.
of spirits, demons, and shit like that. That don't come from drugs or meditation. That, like, were
Okay.
actual things that were happening to me. But I don't know whether or not that was just some weird psychosis that I was experiencing that all kids somehow have to go through and get over at some degree and some level in their lives. I don't know how
Mm.
real you want to take it, or how literal people will take it. But in my
Mm.
life, it was real. And
Yeah.
yeah, so, and that also helped me figure out how to, like, balance goodness and badness and be okay
Right.
with
Right.
evil and seeing the goodness in all things, and
Right.
because all things are all things. So,
Right.
but yeah,
Right.
thanks for letting me explain that experience to you, because I
No, I
haven't.
appreciate it. Really.
Yeah,
I was gonna say. Oh. I think we'll get on this again when you have time, maybe after the holiday. Um, to just get more, because what I want to try to do to that, I want to get more into the details of these, but
sure. Yeah, we could talk about it.
not just like for like the ghost stories or whatever,
Yeah,
but
whatever.
the reason is because I feel like there is an empirical element, because um, there's so many commonalities when people describe similar experiences, and I would say that there's a few different categories. And so one would be uh, those that seem evil like that, and then another would be those that seem divine, like you have some kind of a interaction with God or divinity of some sort. And then there'd probably be like another category of things between good and evil, things that are kind of similar, that you could maybe interpret that way, but not so much in that good or evil category.
The agency. I'll tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So I want to say in 20 seconds.
Mm,
I just want to say this. It'll take like 20 seconds.
yeah.
The experience of the obelisk gift
Mm,
that I've had, which in ancient times, obelisks were used to route and reroute energy like receiver towers. They were used by, like, the Egyptian, the Kemets, to literally be like what an antenna is to
right,
us
right.
today. And uh, um, every time that I've ever done DMT, which is kind of a lot of times, I always go to this place at the edge of reality that is like a giant agency, and
Mm,
the literal men in black exist there, and there are humanoids there. There are no, like, weird thing. There's machines, and we're all machines, and we're all people that are there, and there's men in black, and they're not good and they're not bad. They just kind of, like, maintain order, and, like, they're like, you can't come here, you can't see this shit. But I end up somehow going there every time.
mm, wow.
um yeah, so we can talk about that another time too, but that's
Yeah,
the neutral zone.
the neutral. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's wrap it up, and then yeah. So try to yeah, just figure out a day that you'll have time, uh the week or two after the 4th of July. And yeah, like I guess what another thing that I want to try to get to with these sort of, like, what would you call it, like this sort of interview or study or segment or whatever, is maybe it's just something you can kind of like help me formulate, is it's like I said, I'm starting to think of it, of how and there may be some like this, but the specific questions that you could almost put on a survey, of like strongly disagree to strongly agree, of to start to see the
The map.
commonality. Well, yeah, the map and commonalities between people having these various experiences. Because if you can start to map this out, and then it becomes more empirical. Like I said, similar to how we can get pretty empirical with personality and psychometrics now.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Maps are
that's
important.
yeah. Well, and I think it helps just because one helps to deal with people like that are more of the Newtonian thinking, but then also so that when people maybe transition from one mind frame to another, it helps them to do so, but also to the tricky thing is making those transitions sometimes as you kind of transition the way that you look at the world, but also doing so in a way that you stay grounded in reality. Because that's sometimes what's dangerous about this too.
Yeah.
Is sometimes
You go off the
I,
deep end into
yeah,
into
yeah.
the ocean of
I've been
metaphysics.
there. I've been there a couple times. Maybe I'm still there. I don't know. But
That's the
where,
abyss, dude.
yeah, you're
That's
like
the
sitting
abyss.
on the abyss. Maybe you don't want to go back from the abyss because it's kind of a intriguing and novel and exciting. Um,
Yeah,
but
being rooted is super important.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Like
yeah,
grounded. Having
yeah.
grounding that you can always go back to is really important. And so I
Right.
think
Like the
that
breadcrumbs to go back to reality with.
yeah, you always need
Right.
breadcrumbs.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't erase your cookies, dude.
Right. Or pebbles maybe because the breadcrumbs get eaten in some of the stories.
Yeah, unless the
Then you
pebbles get
get
eaten
lost.
by the machine folk, then you're screwed
Yeah,
either way.
yeah, yeah. All right. Cool, man. Well, this is good. And yeah, we'll do it again. Just let me know a time that works after the holiday. And
Cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you enjoy the holiday and everything else and have fun with all that America and, you know,
You too, man.
represent the land of the free and the home of the brave and all that.
Yeah. You stay safe, man. Have a good
Okay.
one.
All right. Thanks a lot. See you after the holiday. Thanks.